He touched the golden crystal in the wall and relived that day all over again. His daughter taking her first steps, the scent of baby shampoo, the sun on her cheek. Every detail as vivid as if it were happening right now. And then he realized, this gold devours people alive. But let's rewind. The darkness rings, delicately, like crystal under a fingernail. Daniel Pak opens his eyes and sees the tunnel ceiling above him. Golden veins smolder in the rock, pulsing, slowly and steadily, like a stranger's heart. His first thought is simple. I'm trapped under rubble. But the air flows freely. My chest isn't crushed. His head is intact. He wiggles his fingers. Dirt crumbles under his palms. The light is warm, almost honey-colored. And the spectrum is wrong. Dan props himself up on his elbow and sees a corpse nearby. A man in a heavy lead suit lies on his side. His face looks like that of a 100-year-old man. Sunken eye sockets, deep wrinkles, but his build is young. Broad shoulders, strong arms, a 25-year-old's body, a 90-year-old's face. A pickaxe with a golden sheen is clenched in his dead hand. Dan unclenches his fingers and takes it, weighs it. The balance is awful. The metal is soft. Who even made this tool? He stands up, feels himself over. No broken bones, no wounds. The last thing he remembers. A crack in the roof of a mine in Utah. Trainee Jake is standing right beneath it. Dan pushes him into a niche, then tons of rock from above, then nothing. And now he's here. He reaches for the gold vein. His finger touches the crystal, and the world explodes. His daughter flashes through his mind. Mina is learning to walk. She's 11 months old, holding on to the edge of the sofa, letting go. 1 step, 2. She plops down on her bottom and laughs. The smell of shampoo, the warm carpet under his bare feet, the sun on his cheek. Not a memory, the moment itself. He is reliving it for the second time. Dan pulls his hand away and gasps for air. His heart is pounding. It was real. And the crystal is pulsing a little faster now, as if he'd tasted it. And for the first time in 10 years in the mines, Dan feels no fear. That is what frightens him most. He walks down the tunnel. He crouches. Veins run along the walls like blood vessels. Further from where he woke up, they're thinner. The air is drier. A draft. A draft means an exit. Dan quickens his pace. The tunnel widens. Crooked notches, damp support beams, poorly secured. Dan sees it instantly. The posts are too far apart. The top beam is cracked and hanging by a thread. Word. One tremor and the whole section will collapse like a house of cards. He walks past. Golden sand on the floor. Lots of sand. He rubs it between his fingers. The sand is warm. All on its own. And it smells. Heated metal and freshly cut grass all at once. A golden mist hangs in the air. Tiny particles settle on his skin, on his lips. He inhales them with every breath and remembers the corpse. A young body, an old man's face, a lead suit. The lead shields him. Dan covers his mouth with his sleeve and pushes forward. The light is brighter. Ordinary. Daylight. He steps out of the shaft. and freezes. Below lies a valley. The sky is gray with a golden sheen, as if someone had sprinkled copper dust into the clouds. At the foot of the mountain is a village, 24 houses, wooden walls, thatched roofs, smoke from the chimneys. Men are hauling wheelbarrows. A woman is hanging laundry. A child is chasing a skinny dog. A set for a medieval movie. No wires, no antennas, nothing from the 21st century. And Dan realizes it calmly and clearly. He's not in Utah, not in Colorado. He's not even on Earth. Mina, his wife, the surgery in March, the money in the bottom drawer. These thoughts hit him like a sledgehammer. His knees go weak. He sits down on the rocks and closes his eyes. 3 minutes. He gives himself 3 minutes. Then he stands up.
Because Daniel Pack has spent 10 years in mines from Nevada to Colombia and knows one rule: panic kills faster than a cave-in. He heads down toward the village. People spot him from a distance. A barefoot boy of about 12 runs out first. He freezes 10 paces away, opens his mouth, turns around and shouts something toward the houses. Dan doesn't understand a word. The language is foreign, abrupt, with clipped consonants. A man comes out of the house, large, a graying beard, hands like shovels. He looks at Dan, at the pickaxe, at his clothes. He speaks slowly, as if to a child. Dan spreads his hands. "I don't understand." The man frowns. He approaches. He grabs Dan's hand and turns his palm upward. On his palm is a golden mark from the crystal, that very one, from the touch in the tunnel. The man lets go of his hand, and his face changes. He's not frowning anymore. He's confused and a little scared. It's Garen. Dan learns his name 3 days later when he begins to make out words. But right now, Garen does something simple. He takes him by the shoulder, leads him into the house, sits him down at the table, sets a bowl of something hot in front of him, and waits. Dan eats. The soup is thick and bland. The meat is tough. The bread is coarse. It's the best meal of his life. Because he's alive. And somewhere infinitely far away, Mina is waiting for him to come home. He finishes every last bite, sets down the bowl, looks at Garen, and begins to learn how to live all over again. For the first week, Dan is silent and observes, not because he doesn't want to speak, he simply can't. The language here is different. But Daniel Pack worked in the mines for 10 years with Mexicans, Colombians, and Chileans. He knows how to learn a language quickly. You point to an object, you listen, you repeat. Point to the next one. By the third day, he has 40 words in his head. Stone, water, food, fire, mine, pickaxe, time. Time is the word spoken most often here. Garen lives alone. His wife died long ago. His 2 sons died in the mine. Dan figures this out from the things in the house. 2 hooks on the wall for jackets, empty. 2 places at the table. The chairs are covered in dust. Garen doesn't put them away. He can't, or won't. Dan takes the 3rd corner. He sleeps on a straw mattress. During the day, he follows Garen around and watches. Garen works in the mine. Every morning, he puts on a lead suit and heads for the mountain with a group of men, a crew, 8 men, all the same type, wiry, lean. They look older than their years. On the 4th day, Dan goes with them. Garen doesn't mind.
He gestures to him. Stay behind. Don't touch anything. Watch. Dan watches, and what he sees makes him clench his teeth. The miners work brutally. They approach a vein of chronite and strike it directly with their pickaxes, perpendicularly, with all their might. The crystal crumbles. A cloud of gold dust rises. They inhale it.
From a whole vein, they knock out small fragments from the vein. Most of it crumbles into sand right in their hands. Dan calculates in his head. About 80% is lost, maybe more. It's like mining diamonds with dynamite. The supports in the tunnel are barely holding up. There's no ventilation. They breathe in this gold dust for 6 hours a day. Without masks, no respirators. A lead suit protects the skin, but the lungs are exposed. That's why they're aging. That's why that guy in the deep tunnel lies there with the face of a 100-year-old man. Dust of seconds. They inhale someone else's time, and it burns away their own. Dan stands by the wall and watches as 20-year-old guys cough up gold. By the 5th day, he's gathered enough words to form a simple F. He approaches Garen in the evening after his shift. Everyone is sitting at a large table in the barn that serves as the commune's common house. Dan takes a piece of bread from the table. He places it in front of him. He takes a knife and cuts the bread crosswise, roughly. Crumbs fly in all directions. Half the slice crumbles. The miners look on, puzzled. Then Dan takes a second piece. He turns the knife and cuts lengthwise, neatly, slowly. The slice comes away in one piece, not a single crumb. He shows both pieces. He points his finger at the first one, then he points toward the mine. He points at the crumbled bread. You. He points at the whole slice. Me. Garen looks at the bread, then at Dan, then back at the bread. One of the young miners snorts. The guy's name is Tobias. He's burly, 22 years old, cocky. He says something quick and sharp. The others laugh. Dan doesn't understand the words, but gets the tone. Some outsiders come to teach us how to work. Dan doesn't argue. He stands up and says one word to Garen that he learned yesterday. Tomorrow. The next morning, Dan goes into the mine alone, without a suit, in his jeans and jacket, with a stranger's pickaxe. Garen tries to stop him, points to the suit. Dan shakes his head. He tears a strip of fabric from the jacket lining. He scoops up some coal from the fire. He crushes it finely. He wraps it in the fabric. He presses it against his face. The simplest coal filter. Not perfect, but better than nothing. Garen looks at this contraption as if it were madness. Dan enters the tunnel. He walks to the first major vein. He stops. He places his palm on the wall next to the vein, not on the crystal itself, on the rock around it. He listens to the stone. The rock here resembles gneiss, layered, with distinct stress lines. He can see them. 10 years of working with rock have taught him to read stone like a book. The chronite vein runs at an angle of about 30 degrees to the horizon. The main stress line runs perpendicular to it. If you strike the vein directly, the impact travels along the stress line and the crystal shatters into dozens of fragments. That's exactly what the locals do. Dan pulls out his pickaxe. He starts working not on the vein but around it, a circumferential groove. He removes the rock layer by layer, parallel to the vein, like slicing sausage. You don't chop with an axe, but cut with a knife. It's slow work. It takes 3 hours for a single crystal. The locals would have chipped out 30 fragments in that time, but when Dan finally extracts the crystal from the rock intact,
He's holding a stone the size of a walnut in his hand, golden, solid, without a single crack. He feels the crystal pulsing in his palm, warm, alive, and along with the pulsation comes a familiar sensation. Something is pulling from his head. Not pain, more like someone is gently pulling a thread from fabric. He puts the crystal in his pocket. Then he wraps it in a cloth. Skin contact must be minimized. He understands that now. Dan emerges from the mine by evening. The crew has already returned. They sit at the table sorting through their haul.
3 dozen small shards lie in a heap. Half have already lost their luster. Sand. Dan silently places his crystal on the table. A single stone, whole, shining, the size of a walnut. The chatter dies down. Garen picks up the crystal with 2 fingers, holds it up to his eyes. His mouth opens, then closes. Tobias stops chewing. Dan pulls a piece of glass out of his pocket. He found it yesterday, the neck of a broken bottle. He spent 2 hours grinding it against a stone until it became a rough lens. He takes the crystal from Garen, places it on the table, brings a candle close to it. Light passes through the crystal and refracts. Rays spread across the table, warm, golden. Dan knows that the crystal is good in this form, but not perfect. He needs a cutting tool, a real one. But even now, the difference is clear. The shards on the table are lifeless. His stone is alive. Garen looks at the crystal, then at Dan, then back at the crystal, and does something Dan expects. The old man stands up. He takes off his hat and places it on the table next to the stone. Dan later learns that this is a gesture of respect. A miner takes off his hat before the one who showed him a new vein. Tobias is still silent. So is everyone else. In the corner, a boy is coughing. He's about 14, skinny, pale. His cough is wet and heavy, with a golden tint to the phlegm. Dan nods in his direction and looks at Garen, then at the crystal, then back at the boy. He doesn't know enough words yet. But Garen understands. The old man shakes his head, slowly, sadly. He speaks a long sentence of which Dan understands only 2 words. It won't be enough. Dan takes the crystal. He looks at it. He has a high school course in optics and 3 years of working with emeralds in Colombia in his head. He knows what a cut does. It organizes refraction. It directs light along the necessary axes. It turns chaos into a system. If chronite works through light and refraction, then the cut must do the same. Organize the flow of time, turn a chaotic burst into a smooth, measured release. He needs a tool. But right now, all he has is a glass lens and a pickaxe with a fragile blade. Dan wraps the crystal in a cloth and puts it in his pocket. Tomorrow. Everything tomorrow. He lies down on the mattress in Garen's house. He closes his eyes. He tries to remember the name of his neighbor in Colorado, the one who lived 2 houses down. He also had a dog, a redhead. What was his name? He can't remember. He falls asleep. On the 7th day, Dan goes to the blacksmith. His name is Orrin, a burly man with scorched hands and a perpetually sullen face. The smithy stands on the edge of the village, small, dark, a forge, an anvil, a set of hammers, a barrel of water for quenching. Dan takes a look around in 3 minutes and figures out the main problem. The iron is soft. Orrin works with raw iron, no carbon,
no hardening.
That's why the picks crumble against the chisel. That's why every tool lasts only 2 or 3 shifts. Dan shows Orrin the pick he took from the tunnel, runs his fingernail along the blade. The metal gives way, soft as copper. Then he points to the coals in the forge, to the iron ingot, and tries to explain. He has few words, but his hands speak for him. He takes a piece of coal, crumbles it, points to the molten metal, explains with gestures. Put this inside. Mix it. Heat it. Harder. Even hotter. Orrin looks at him like he's crazy. Coal into metal? Why? But Garin stands behind Dan. The old man nods to the blacksmith. Try it. Orrin tries. The first attempt fails. The temperature is too low. The carbon won't bond with the iron. Dan points to the bellows. Harder. Pump harder. The second attempt is better. The metal melts white hot. Dan himself pours in the coal dust. He stirs it with a long rod. Then he pulls out the workpiece. The red-hot bar lies on the anvil. Orrin reaches for the water barrel. Dan grabs his hand. No, not water. He looks around. He sees a bowl of oil by the door. Animal fat. Not ideal, but better than water. Quenching in oil allows for more even cooling, fewer cracks, less brittleness. He takes the bowl and lowers the red-hot bar into it. The oil flares up. Smoke. A stench. Orrin recoils. Dan holds the bar with tongs until the oil burns off. Then he pulls it out, places it on the anvil. He takes Orrin's hammer. He strikes the bar. The metal rings out, clean and clear, not at all like before. Before, it sounded dull, dead. Now it sings. Dan runs his fingernail across the surface. The nail slides, leaves no mark. He shows this to Orrin. The blacksmith takes the bar, tries it himself. His eyes grow wide. He says something quickly and loudly. Dan understands one word. How? Dan pokes his finger into the coals, then into the iron. Then he points to the temperature, then to the oil. Coal, iron, heat, oil. 4 steps. Carbon steel. It's been on Earth for 2,000 years. They don't know it here. For the next 3 days, Dan lives in the smithy. Orrin is angry at first. A stranger has come into his home and is giving orders. But the results speak louder than pride. By the 10th day, they have their first pickaxe made of the new metal, heavier than the old one, 5 times stronger. Dan rebalanced the head himself, shifted the center of gravity closer to the blade, shortened the handle. You can work precisely with a pickaxe like this, not swinging with your whole arm, but with short, controlled strikes. Orrin holds the finished pickaxe and is silent for a long time. Then he says a phrase to Dan that Dan can finally make out. You've blown my mind. Dan isn't sure the translation is exact, but he gets the gist. At the same time, he's working on something else. Respirators. Gold dust is killing the miners. The coal filter he made for himself on the first day is a temporary solution. He needs something more reliable. He takes a piece of thick fabric, folds it into 4 layers. He packs finely crushed coal between the layers. He sews the edges. He attaches strings to tie it at the back of the head. The result is a crude mask, ugly, uncomfortable, but it traps the dust. He makes 8 of them, 1 for each person in the work crew. He brings them to the shed in the evening and lays them on the table. The miners watch.
Tobias takes a mask, twirls it in his hands, says something mocking. Dan already understands enough to make out what it is. "Why do I need a rag on my face?" Dan points to the boy in the corner. "That one. The one coughing up gold." The boy's name is Nolan. He's 14. He's been in the mine for 1.5 years. He's been coughing for 3 months. Dan walks over to him, sits down next to him, takes his hand. The hand is hot. A fever. Dan pulls his crystal out of his pocket. That very one, intact, the size of a walnut. Over the past week, he's worked on it as best he could.
Without proper tools, a perfect cut is impossible. But he's done the main thing. He's filed the facets against a stone. 12 facets. Rough, uneven, but they work. He presses the crystal against Nolan's chest. Light, warm and golden. It passes through the facets and falls on the boy's skin in thin rays. Nolan stops coughing, for the first time in 3 months. His breathing evens out. The feverish flush fades. His eyes close. He falls asleep, peacefully, calmly, like the child he is. Dan holds the crystal to his chest until he feels the stone has given enough. Then he removes it. The crystal has dimmed. It has grown slightly smaller. A part of it has gone into the boy. It has bought him time. How much? Dan doesn't know. Maybe a week, maybe a month. But Nolan is breathing. It's quiet in the barn. Tobias silently takes the mask from the table, puts it on, ties it at the back of his head, doesn't say a word. The others do the same, one by one. Garen puts his on last, looks at Dan, says, "You helped him." Dan nods. Garen says one more thing. "But you paid a price too." Dan is silent, because Garen is right. While he held the crystal against Nolan's chest, he felt something slipping away. Not time, not years, something worse. He tries to remember the taste of the borscht his grandmother used to make, that very one, with garlic and sour cream, in winter, in a small kitchen. He can't remember. It's empty, as if someone had cut a piece out of a photo album. The frame is there, but the pictures are gone. He knows there was borscht. He knows his grandmother was there, but the taste is gone. Dan steps outside. He stands under a gray-gold sky, and he counts. 1 crystal, 1 memory, every time. Every stone is a choice, to save someone here, or to keep a piece of home, a piece of Sora, a piece of Mina. He closes his eyes and says to himself, "Sora, black hair, a mole on her left cheek, laughing, covering her mouth with her hand. Mina." By the end of the 3rd week, Dan speaks the local language well enough to explain simple things. His grammar is broken, his accent is terrible, but they understand him, and he understands them. The first thing he truly learns is how the world works. Garen tells him in the evenings by the hearth, slowly, in simple words, like to a child. The continent is called horology. Time here is not an abstraction, but a substance. It can be extracted, weighed, sold. Chronite is frozen seconds, minutes, years. A gram of chronite costs as much as a house. 10 grams is a year of life. For 100 grams, you can buy a ministerial post. The average life expectancy is 35 years. Children are born with ticking clocks.
The golden dust in the air is tiny particles of chronite, everyone shaken by it. Everyone ages faster than they should. Dan is 34. Here, he's considered an old man. By local standards, Garin is 100 years old. In reality, he's 53. But he looks 70.
2 sons. Both died in the mine. One was 19, the other was 22. Dan listens and says nothing. He thinks of Mina, of how she's afraid of shots, of how she squeezes his finger when the doctor comes over with the needle. She has a heart defect. She's 5. She needs surgery. She's far away. She's so far away that the word doesn't make sense. Garin continues his story. The Chronograph Guild, a mining monopoly. They control all the major mines. Garin's crew works on a small side tunnel, a side tunnel the guild considers empty. They're wrong. The veins here are thin, but they're there. Garin found them 20 years ago and has been feeding the settlement ever since. But the fragments the cooperative mines are crumbs, enough to keep from dying, nothing more. King Velros III sits in the north. He is 142 years old. He buys up chronite from all the guilds. His thirst for immortality has turned him into a black hole. The market is bled dry. Ordinary people can't afford even a single second. When a peasant's wife dies in pain, the only thing her husband can do is hold her hand. Because an hour of pain relief costs a year's harvest. In the South, the cult of the Sand People is growing. Fanatics. They believe that time must be returned to the god of time, the very one whose body turned into chronite thousands of years ago. They blow up mines. They kill miners. They consider the mining of chronite a sin. Dan listens and maps it all out in his head. 3 forces: the crown in the north, the cult in the south, the guild in the middle, and the village of Garin is squeezed between them all. Small, poor, of no interest to anyone, for now. In the 4th week, Dan descends into a deep tunnel for the first time. Not the one where the crew works, deeper, to where Garin forbids anyone from going. The old man calls this place the dead end. He says it's prone to cave-ins. Dan takes a new pickaxe made of Oran steel. He takes an oil lamp. He puts on a respirator and heads down. The tunnel narrows after 200 meters. The ceiling drops. There are no supports. The rock is different, not nice, something denser, dark with flecks of gold. The air is different here, thicker, warmer. Golden dust hangs in a dense cloud. The respirator helps, but Dan feels the particles settling on his hands and neck. He keeps going. 300 meters from the entrance, the tunnel splits. The left passage is blocked. The right one drops steeply downward. Dan chooses the right one. The descent is steep. He plants his feet and holds onto the walls. His palms slide across the rock. After descending 50 meters, he stops. He presses his ear against the wall. He listens. Silence. No, not silence. There is something. Right on the edge of audibility. Rhythmic. Quiet. Like a clock behind the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Steady. Not the random creaking of rock. Not dripping water. A rhythm. Dan counts. 1 beat per second. No. 1 beat every 2 seconds. Slow. Steady. Like the heartbeat of a sleeping person. He takes his ear away from the wall. He stands in the darkness. The oil lamp casts shadows. The gold veins here are thicker than up above, much thicker.
They pulse in time with that sound. Dan sees it clearly. The walls are sighing. Tick. The glow is slightly brighter. Tick. Slightly dimmer. Like breathing. Something down there is alive, or was alive, or is coming back to life. Dan stands and thinks. The geologist in him says one thing: it's an anomaly, it needs to be investigated, mapped, sampled. The miner in him says something else. Get out. When the mountain speaks to you, it means it's unstable. The father in him says a third thing. The answers are here. Maybe the answer to the question of how to get home. He climbs back up. He doesn't tell anyone about the ticking. It's too soon. Instead, he does what he does best. Work. For the next 2 weeks, he rebuilds the mine. He starts with ventilation.
There's no air movement in the tunnel. Dust hangs motionless and settles in the lungs. Dan knows how to fix this. He needs a vertical shaft, a pipe leading from the tunnel to the surface. The draft pulls warm air upward. Fresh air is drawn in from below. The simplest form of ventilation. It's 3,000 years old. The Egyptians used it in the pyramids. He takes 4 from the crew: Tobias, Quiet Rick, Tall Fern, and Nolan. Yes, Nolan. The boy has been breathing normally for 2 weeks now. The crystal did its job. The disease is frozen. He's eager to get into the mine. Dan gives him permission. But he assigns him the easiest job, carrying rock in a wheelbarrow, with a mask. Always with a mask. They drive the shaft in 10 days. A vertical tube in the rock, 3 meters in diameter, 20 meters up to the surface. Hard work, but when the last rock is broken out and light from the surface pours into the mine in a column, what Dan has been waiting for happens. The air starts to move. Dust begins to rise. It goes up the shaft.
For the first time in decades, the air in the tunnel is breathable. The crew stands and watches. Fern takes off his mask. He inhales, deeply, fully, and says one word: clean. Garen stands at the entrance to the shaft. He looks up. Light falls on his face. Dan sees tears streaming down the old man's cheeks. Garen isn't crying out of joy. He's crying out of anger. Because that shaft hasn't been here for 40 years. Because his sons breathe dust every day. Because they died. And the solution was so simple. Dan stands nearby and says nothing. He doesn't offer comfort. He doesn't say that everything will be okay. He knows the price of those words. Instead, he puts his hand on Garen's shoulder. He stands there until the old man wipes his face. Then he speaks. I have some more ideas. Garen nods. Go ahead. And Dan speaks. He talks about shifts. Not 6 hours straight, 3 shifts of 2 hours each, with breaks in between.
He talks about markings. Dangerous areas need to be marked. A red rag on a support means don't enter without checking. He talks about a map. He'll draw a map of the mine, every passage, every vein, every crack. 2 months in horology. Dan isn't an outsider anymore. He still speaks with an accent and mixes up his cases. But the crew has accepted him. Not with words, with actions. Tobias now brings him breakfast in the mornings. He silently sets the bowl by the door and leaves. It's his way of saying thank you.
Rick, who in 2 months has spoken maybe 20 words to Dan, gave him a pair of boots. Old ones, patched up, but sturdy. Nolan follows him like a tail. The boy is still breathing normally. The crystal is holding. But Dan knows it's temporary. Freezing the disease doesn't mean curing it. He needs a real crystal, cut correctly with precise calculations. For that, he needs a tool. Dan works with Orrin every evening. The blacksmith isn't angry anymore. He's gotten...
Carbon steel has changed his life. His knives no longer dull within a week. His axes chop twice as fast. People from neighboring villages come to him with orders. For the first time in years, Orrin feels like a master craftsman rather than a mere artisan. And he's ready to listen. Dan asks him to make a set, a fine chisel, 3 sizes, a stone grinding wheel, a crystal clamp, a vise, a magnifying glass made of polished glass with a holder. Orrin sets to work. Not everything goes right the first time. The chisel breaks twice, the clamp won't hold. But by the end of the 2nd month, Dan has a workspace, a table by the window in Garen's house. The tools are laid out in order. The magnifying glass is mounted on a stand. Candles are arranged so that the light falls at the right angle. He sits down at the table with a new crystal. He mined this stone a week ago. Large, clear, no internal cracks. Perfect material. Dan secures it in a clamp and begins to work. Emerald cutting on Earth is an exact science. The angles are calculated based on the refractive index. Each facet is responsible for the direction of the light. Chronite is not an emerald, but the principle is the same. Light enters, it refracts, it exits. If the facets are positioned correctly, the output is uniform, controlled, predictable. Dan works for 3 hours. He removes microscopic layers. He rotates the crystal. He removes more. He checks through a magnifying glass. The candlelight passes through the facets and falls on the table as a rainbow. No, not a rainbow, golden rays. Each ray is separate, even, of equal brightness. 48 facets, 48 rays. Dan places the crystal on the table and brings the candle closer. The light refracts and the room freezes. Not a metaphor. Dust hangs in the air. The candle's flame stands still. Shadows freeze on the walls. 3 seconds. Then everything returns. The dust settles. The flame flickers. The shadows move. Garen sits against the wall, motionless. His eyes are wide open. He saw it. Dan takes the crystal and weighs it in his hand. A stone the size of a walnut. 48 facets. Each facet is 1 hour of pure controlled time. 48 hours in a single stone. The crew extracts 30 shards per shift. Together, they yield 2 hours of messy, unpredictable time. His single crystal is worth more than the crew's monthly haul. Garen stands up. He walks over to the table. He looks at the stone, then at Dan. "How much?" Dan answers. 48 hours. 1 hour per edge. Garen is silent. He's calculating in his head. Dan sees his lips move. Then the old man speaks slowly. "My granddaughter is 17. She's getting married in 3 years. I won't live to see it." Dan looks at him. "How much do you need?" Garen answers. 3 years, 1,000 days. Dan calculates. 1,000 days is 24,000 hours. 500 of those crystals. Impossible. But there's another way. If you cut the crystal not for hours, but for slowing down. Not to give a person extra time, but to stretch out what they have. Like slow motion. 1 day feels like 2. Then you wouldn't need 500 crystals, but 50, maybe 30. Dan says, "I'll try." It's not a promise. It's the truth. He'll try. The next day, Dan takes a crystal and goes to the village. He knows the rumors have already spread. A small village. Everyone knows everything. The man who pulls out whole stones. The man who made the masks and the pit. The man who stopped Nolan's illness. He walks into the local doctor's house. Doctor is a bit of a stretch. An old woman named Helda, a herbalist, a bone setter, the only person in the village who knows anything about healing. A girl is sitting on a bench in the corner. She's 8. Her name is Sadie. She's been deaf since birth. Helda says that the girl has never heard a single sound, not her mother's voice, not birds, not rain, not her own name. Dan sits down next to Sadie. The girl looks at him warily. He takes out the crystal, shows it to her. She reaches out, but doesn't touch it. She waits for permission. Dan nods. She takes the stone in both hands. Nothing happens. The crystal doesn't work when touched. It works with light. Dan takes the stone. He places it on the windowsill. He waits for a ray of sunlight to hit the facet. Light enters the crystal. It refracts. A golden ray falls on the girl's head. Sadie freezes. Her eyes grow huge. She turns her head, slowly, as if she hears something. And she does. Helda quietly calls her name. Sadie. The girl flinches. She turns toward Helda. Her mouth opens. She hears. For the first time in her life, she hears a voice. Helda calls again. Sadie. The girl gets up from the bench. She takes a step toward Helda. Her lips tremble. She isn't crying. She doesn't know how to cry at sounds. She doesn't know that sounds can bring on tears. But Helda is crying. And Sadie's father, standing in the doorway, is crying. And Dan is standing by the wall, watching. He isn't crying. His throat is tight and his eyes are burning, but he isn't crying, because right now he's thinking about Mina. About how Mina is afraid of the silence in the hospital. How she asks for music to be turned on when she falls asleep. How she sings a song about a butterfly, off-key and loud. He remembers that. For now, he remembers. The crystal will work for a day, 24 hours of hearing. Then the gem will go out, and Sadie will be back in silence. But for this day, these 24 hours, she'll hear her father's voice, the rain, the birds, her own name. Dan walks out of Helda's house. The city will be talking about this for 6 months. He knows, and he knows it's dangerous. Rumors will reach the guild, the capital, the cultists, the man who works miracles with chronite. They'll be looking for him. Every faction will want him for themselves, or want him eliminated. But today, he doesn't care. Today, the deaf girl hears the rain. In the evening, Dan sits at the table and tries to remember Sora's phone number. 10 digits. He's dialed them 1,000 times. His finger remembers the movement across the screen, but the numbers slip away. The third or fourth, a 7 or an 8, he's not sure. Crystal took another piece, a small one, insignificant, a phone number. What difference does it make? There are no phones here. But Dan clenches his fists under the table, because it's not about the number. It's about the fact that every lost piece is a step away from them.
away from Sora, away from Mina. Every crystal he makes for someone here, every stone he holds in his hands, takes it from there. Rumors travel faster than feet. Dan knew that. He was prepared for it, but he didn't expect her to be the first to arrive. Evelyn Hartley appears in the settlement at the end of the 3rd month, thin, pale, in a traveling cloak splattered with mud up to her knees.
Glasses on her nose. The lenses are cloudy and cracked. A rare thing in this world. Glass is expensive here. Only scientists and doctors wear glasses. She is a former doctor from the town of Bryn Mawr. A 2-day walk along a muddy road, alone. She knocks on Garen's door at dawn. Dan opens it. The woman stands in the doorway and looks at him. Her eyes are red from lack of sleep. Her lips are pressed together. She isn't crying. She stopped crying a long time ago. She speaks in an even voice. My mother is dying. The rot of time. All the chronographs have failed. Treatment isn't worth the cost. I was told there's a man here who makes crystals differently. Dan stands in the doorway, barefoot, in a rumpled shirt. He looks at Evelyn and sees what he's seen 1,000 times in the mines, a person who's come for their last hope. You don't tell someone like that to wait. You tell them to come in. He steps back. She enters. She sits down at the table, hands on her knees, back straight. Even now. Even after 2 days on the road, she holds herself together. Not because she's strong, because if she lets go, she'll fall apart. Dan sets water and bread in front of her. He sits across from her. Tell me. Evelyn tells her story, briefly, precisely, like a doctor. Mother, 60 years old, an impossible age by local standards. She lived to be 60 only because Evelyn's husband was a chronograph and brought home shards. Her husband died 4 years ago. The shards ran out. Her mother began to age normally, then faster than normal. Then rot appeared. A tumor that eats time from the inside, the local equivalent of cancer. Cells break down not from mutation, but from time leakage. The body ages unevenly. Her left hand is already like that of a 100-year-old. Her right one still works. Her heart skips a beat. The pain is constant. Evelyn consulted 4 chronographs. They all said the same thing. To freeze it, she needs 20 grams of pure chronite. It costs 20 houses. She doesn't have that kind of money. No one has that kind of money. Dan listens. He calculates. 20 grams of chronite is their measure. Rough, uncut chronite in shards. Chaotic recoil. That's why a lot is needed. But if it's cut, if the stream is directed precisely at the affected area, not flooding the whole house with water, but hitting the fire with a jet, then you wouldn't need 20 grams, but 2, maybe less. 1 crystal, properly cut, with the right number of facets, with the right refractive index. He tells her, I need to see your mother. Evelyn nods. Dan gathers his tools, wraps them in cloth, puts them in a bag, tells Garen he's leaving for 3 days. The old man nods, doesn't ask why. He's seen Evelyn. He understands. The road to Bryn Mawr takes a day and a half. Dan walks fast. Evelyn keeps up. They hardly speak. But during a rest stop in the evening, she asks, Why are you doing this? Dan thinks, for a long time. Then he answers, Because I know how. She looks at him over her cracked glasses. That's not enough. He shrugs. Not enough. But it's the truth. Bryn Mawr is bigger than Garen's village. A real town, stone houses, a market square, a wall around the perimeter. People look better, better fed, but their eyes are the same, tired, dull. Evelyn's mother lies in a small room on the second floor. Her name is Margot. She's small, withered. The left side of her body looks 100 years old. The right side looks 60. The difference is visible to the naked eye. Her face is lopsided. One half is smooth, the other is deeply wrinkled. She isn't sleeping. The pain won't let her. Dan sits down beside her. He takes her hand, the right one, the one that still works. Margot looks at him with cloudy eyes. "Who are you?" Dan answers, "A man who will try to help." He takes a crystal out of the bag, clear, uncut. He brought it with him on purpose. He secures it in a clamp. He places it on the windowsill next to the bed. He looks at Margot. He thinks.
The rot of time is a leak. Time is leaking out of the cells faster than it should. So what's needed isn't freezing, but a seal, to slow the leak in a specific spot. For that, a facet is needed that doesn't give off time, but holds it in. A reverse cut. Not scattering, but focusing. Not a lens, but a mirror. He works for 4 hours. Evelyn sits nearby and watches. She doesn't interfere. She doesn't ask questions. She just sits there, as if her presence is part of the process. Dan cuts the facets at a different angle, not outward, but inward, concave. The light doesn't scatter, but gathers. 12 facets, each directed toward the center of the stone. When he finishes and holds up a candle, the crystal doesn't emit rays. It draws the light in. For a moment, a dark halo forms around the stone, a shadow in reverse. Dan places the crystal against Margot's left hand, the one that is aged. Nothing. A second, 2, 3. Then Margot exhales, long, deep.
Like a person who has finally laid down a heavy burden. The pain recedes. Not all of it. Dan can see from her face that not all of it, but enough. Margot closes her eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, she falls asleep. Evelyn stands against the wall, pressing her fist to her mouth. Her shoulders are shaking. She isn't crying. She won't let herself. Dan speaks softly. "This will last a month, maybe a month and a half. The crystal will slow the leak, but won't stop it. I need to make a second stone. Better, more precise, but it takes time." Evelyn lowers her hand. She looks at him. Her voice is steady. "What do you need?" Dan lists it off. Pure chronite, the best you can get. A tool thinner than the one we have. Glass for the lenses. Good stuff, no bubbles. And time. He needs time. Evelyn nods. "You'll get everything." She doesn't ask the price. She asks something else. "How can I help you right now?" Dan looks at her straight back, at her glasses, at the doctor's hands. Neat. Precise. You know how to keep records. She almost smiles. "I kept records at Bryn Mawr Hospital for 3 years. Every patient, every medication, every result." Dan nods. "I need someone to write everything down. Every crystal. For whom? How many facets? What effect? How long it lasts?
What works, what doesn't. I can't keep it all in my head. He doesn't tell her why, doesn't tell her that his head is slowly going empty, that every crystal takes a piece away, that the records are necessary because soon he'll start forgetting his own methods. Evelyn doesn't know that. Not yet. 4th month. Workshop is a fancy word for what it is. A table by the window, a set of tools, a magnifying glass on the stand, a shelf with rough crystals, Evelyn's notebook where she writes everything down. But Dan is already thinking bigger. He needs a separate room. Clean, bright, with good lighting. Cutting requires precision, and precision requires light. He asks Garen.
The old man thinks it over for a day and gives him an old barn on the edge of the village. The roof leaks. The walls are full of cracks, but it's a good spot. Windows facing east. The morning sun is perfect for working with chronite. For the next 2 weeks, Dan and Tobias fix up the barn. They patch the roof. They caulk the walls. They set up a new workbench. Dan draws a layout for the tools. The work area is by the window, storage in the back, a spot for Evelyn with her notebooks by the wall. And one more thing. He puts up a sign by the door, a wooden one, carved by Oren. It has one word on it. Workshop. Evelyn looks at the sign and says, "Modest?" Dan replies, "Let's start small." People start coming, first from the village, then from neighboring villages. Rumors about a deaf girl who heard her father's voice have spread throughout the region. People come to Dan with whatever they have, a sack of grain, dried meat, a piece of cloth, a pair of boots. They don't know how much his work is worth. He doesn't know either, because he doesn't have a price. He doesn't trade in crystals. He doesn't make them to sell. Every stone is a name. For Nolan, for Sadie, for Margot. When a farmer comes with his sick wife, Dan asks for a name. "What's her name?" The farmer is surprised. "Why do you need to know?" Dan replies, "I don't make a crystal. I make a crystal for her." The farmer gives a name. Agnes. Dan nods. "Tell me about Agnes. What hurts? How long has it been? Where exactly?" The farmer tells him. Dan listens. He takes notes. Evelyn takes notes too. Then he goes down into the mine and extracts a crystal. Then he cuts it. Each time differently. Each time for a specific purpose. For Agnes, who has joint pain, he makes a stone with long facets, slow, steady release, like a compress. For the old man from the distant village whose right eye is going blind, he makes a stone with a single large facet, a focused beam. Like a surgical scalpel made of light, it works every time. Not perfectly, not always as he had calculated, but it works. And every time the crystal drinks from it, in small sips. By the end of the 4th that month, Dan can't remember the address of the house in Colorado. He knows he lived on a street with chestnut trees. He remembers the chestnuts. He remembers how Mina used to collect them in her pockets in the fall. But the house number and the street name have vanished. He writes it down in a separate notebook, not the one Evelyn keeps, his own, a small one, which he hides under his mattress. In it, he writes down everything he remembers about home. Sora, black hair down to her shoulders, a mole on her left cheek. She works at the library, loves to read before bed. Mina, 5 years old, draws butterflies, sings off-key, afraid of shots, heart defect, surgery in March. Every evening he rereads the list,
adds details while he still remembers.
He crosses out the ones he has already lost. The list becomes both longer and shorter, more entries, fewer memories behind them. One night, Evelyn sees him with the notebook. She doesn't ask, but she watches. And Dan knows she sees. She sees a man clinging to something. To what, she doesn't yet understand. In the 5th month, Sun Jia arrives. She doesn't arrive. She's already here. She's always been here. Garen's granddaughter, 19 years old, the only female miner in the crew. Dan had seen her from day one but hadn't paid her any mind. She worked in the farthest section. She came in late. She left early. She wore pants and had a short haircut. By local standards, this is outrageous. Women here don't go down into the mine. But Jia doesn't ask for permission. She goes down every day. She ventures into the most dangerous work faces, where the supports creak and the ceiling crumbles. Dan notices this when he starts checking the markings for hazardous zones. He marks the work face with a red rag. Do not enter without inspection. The next day, the rag has been moved. Someone went in. He puts the rag back. It's moved again. The 3rd time, he arrives early and waits. Jia appears with a pickaxe on her shoulder. She sees him at the entrance to the face. She stops. She looks. Dan says, "This face is dangerous. The roof might cave in." She replies, "I know." "Then why are you going in there?" She is silent. Then she says, "My father died in this tunnel 4 years ago. He didn't finish the vein. I'm finishing it." Dan looks at her. 19 years old, short hair, a stubborn chin, hands covered in calluses, angry eyes. Not at him, at herself. He's seen this before, in the mines. Young guys who crawl into the deepest holes not because they're brave, but because they feel guilty. They think they have to. They think they don't deserve safety. Dan speaks to her quietly. "Your grandfather wants you to live, not to keep digging." Jia flinches, as if struck. Dan continues, "Stop looking for death. Start looking for veins. You have the best hearing in the crew." She is silent, for a long time. Then she speaks. "How do you know about my hearing?" "Because I've seen it. You're the first to notice when the rock changes. You turn your head toward the wall a second before the stone starts to creak. You hear the mountain." Jia looks at him, for the first time, without anger, with surprise. No one had ever noticed that before. Dan turns and walks to the workbench. An hour later, he returns with a sheet of parchment, a map of the mine. He spreads it out on the rock and points. "Here are the 3 veins we're working on. Here's your father's abandoned face. Here's the deep adit where I went alone. Show me where you hear the mountain best." 6th month. The workshop is up and running. Dan cuts crystals. Evelyn keeps records and greets visitors. G.A. mines chronite in the mine. Tobias and Rick ensure safety in the tunnels. Nolan hauls ore and learns from G.A. Oren forges tools. 6 people. A team, not a crew. A crew is mercenaries. A team is a family. Garen stands over it all like an old oak tree, quiet, strong. He doesn't give orders. He is simply there, and that is enough. The fatality rate in the mine has been 0 for the 5th month in a row. Not a single loss, not a single case of accelerated aging. The masks are working. The ventilation is working. The shift system works. The markings work. The miners breathe. They live. They look younger than they did 3 months ago. Everyone notices it.
A delegation from 2 neighboring villages comes to see Dan. 4 men, elders. They ask him to teach them. Dan thinks about it for a day. Then he agrees. He draws a diagram of the ventilation shaft. He explains the principle. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. A vertical pipe is needed from the tunnel to the surface. The diameter must be at least 2 meters. The height depends on the depth of the face.
He draws a diagram of a coal respirator. 4 layers of fabric, coal between the layers, change every 3 days. He draws a diagram of the markings. A red rag means danger. Blue means checked. Green means it's safe to work. The men listen. They take notes. One of them is crying, quietly, without wiping his face. Dan doesn't ask why. He knows. Someone close to this man died in the mine, and he understands that the death was unnecessary, that it could have been prevented, with a rag and coal. That is the most terrifying knowledge, that the enemy is not fate, but ignorance. The men leave. Dan stands at the workshop doorway and watches them walk down the road, tiny figures against a gray-gold sky. Evelyn stands beside him. She speaks. "Do you know what will happen next?" Dan knows. Rumors. They've already spread. A man who extracts time in its entirety. A man under whom miners do not die. A man who gives the deaf their hearing and the sick their peace. Such a man cannot go unnoticed. A week later, the first stranger arrives in the village. Not a peasant, not a miner. A man in fine clothes, clean, with a crest on his sleeve, the crest of the chronograph guild. A golden pickaxe on a black field. The man is called an inspector. He is polite. He smiles. He surveys the village. He enters the mine. He looks at the shaft, at the markings, at the miners in masks. He shakes his head. He writes something down in a notebook. Then he comes to the workshop. He stands in the doorway. He looks at the workbench, at the tools, at the crystals on the shelf. His smile fades. Dan is sitting at the table, working. He doesn't look up. The inspector speaks. "You've got an interesting operation going on here." Dan replies without looking up. "Thank you." The inspector continues. "The guild controls chronite mining across the entire continent. Any mining operation must be licensed. You pay a production tax." Dan sets down his tool. He looks at the inspector. "We're working on a claim the guild declared abandoned 20 years ago. We're mining what you threw away." The inspector smiles again. "We didn't throw it away. We classified it as unprofitable. Those are different things." Dan stands up, walks over to the shelf, picks up a crystal, the smallest one, a reject, with an internal crack, places it on the table in front of the inspector. "Here's your tax." The inspector takes the crystal, holds it up to his eye, and freezes. Because even Dan's defective crystal is cut better than the guild's finest stone. The inspector puts the crystal back, slowly, carefully. His hands tremble slightly. He says, "I'll report this to management." He leaves. Dan sits back down at the table. Evelyn stands by the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. "This is the beginning." Dan nods. "Yes." 3 weeks of silence, then a second person arrives. But this one isn't smiling. Tall, muscular, dark skin, a scar across her entire face from temple to chin. She comes at night. Dan doesn't hear her. He wakes up to find someone standing over him.
The moon is shining through the window. The woman stands by the bed and looks down at him, a knife in her hand. Dan doesn't move. He looks at her, at the knife, at the scar, and speaks very calmly. If you wanted to kill me, you wouldn't have woken me up. The woman is silent. Then she puts the knife away. She sits down on the floor against the wall. She speaks. My name is Kate Okafor. The Chronograph Guild paid me to kill you. Dan sits up on the bed. How much did they pay? Kate answers, 5 grams of chronite. Dan does the math. 5 grams is 5 houses. Serious money for a single miner from a backwater town. So they're afraid. Why didn't you kill me? Kate is silent for a long time. Then she says, I watched you for 3 days. I saw how you work. I saw the girl who hears. I saw the boy who breathes. I saw an old man crying by the pit. She falls silent. Then she continues, I returned the deposit.
They'll send someone else. You've got maybe a month. Dan stands up. He puts the kettle on the coals. He sits down across from Kate. She's sitting on the floor in his room with a knife at her hip and has just said she refused to. A normal Tuesday evening in horology. He asks, What are you going to do now? Kate shrugs. I don't know. Go somewhere. She has no home, no family. She was sold into mercenary service at 10. Her memory was erased with a crystal. She doesn't remember her childhood, doesn't remember her parents, doesn't remember her real name. Kate Okafor is the name her first employer. Dan listens. He thinks about his notebook under the mattress, about the list of memories that's getting shorter, about what it's like to forget. He knows, not like she does, but he knows. He says, Stay. She raises an eyebrow. Why should I stay? Because we need security, and because I promise you one thing. Kate waits. I'll find that crystal, the one they used to erase your memory. If it exists, I'll give you back to yourself.
Kate looks at him. For a long time, expressionless. Then she says, You're a strange man, Daniel Pack. He pours her some tea. She takes the mug with both hands, drinks in silence. The next morning, Kate stands at the door of the workshop with a sword at her belt. Her arms are crossed over her chest. Evelyn looks at her, then at Dan, then back at Kate. Who's that? Dan answers, Our security. Evelyn adjusts her glasses. She has a scar across her face, and she looks at me as if she's counting how many blows she needs to land. Dan nods. So she's good at counting. The 7th month. Evelyn's mother dies. Not from rot. The rot is frozen. Dan's crystal works. Margot dies because she's 60 in a world where people live to 35. Her body was just worn out. The crystal held back the disease, but not old age. Dan knew that. Evelyn knew it too. They didn't talk about it out loud, but they knew.
A week before her death, Margot asks Evelyn for one thing. Call Tom. Tom is her youngest son, Evelyn's brother. They haven't spoken in 15 years. A fight over the inheritance, over the house, over the chronite their father left behind after his death. A trifle, a foolishness. 15 years of silence over a handful of seconds. Evelyn sends a letter.
Tom arrives 3 days later. Tall, thin, he looks like Evelyn. The same eyes, the same tight-lipped mouth. He enters the room. He sees his mother. He stops at the door. Margot reaches out her hand, her right hand. Tom takes a step, then another. He sits down next to her. He takes her hand. Margot whispers something to him. Dan can't hear. He's standing behind the door. Evelyn is standing next to him. He can't hear either. But through the crack, he sees Tom lower his head and his shoulders begin to shake. His mother places a hand on the back of his head, strokes it. They sit like that for an hour. Margot dies 4 days after that. Quietly.
At night, Evelyn holds her hand, Tom holds the other. The crystal on Margot's wrist is the last to go out.
It dims. It becomes an ordinary stone. Dead. In the morning, Dan helps carry the body out. They don't bury people in the ground here. Here, they cremate them. The ashes are mixed with gold dust and scattered to the wind. Time returns to time. Evelyn stands by the fire, back straight, eyes dry. Tom stands beside her. They don't speak, but they stand side by side for the first time in 15 years. In the evening, Evelyn climbs onto the roof of the workshop. Dan finds her there. She's sitting on the edge, looking up at the sky. Gray gold. Always gray gold. Dan sits down beside her. He is silent. He waits. Evelyn speaks. You gave her a month. In that month, she made peace with Tom. 15 years of silence, 1 month of conversation, and that was it. And it was enough. She falls silent. Then she speaks. Thank you. Dan nods. They sit on the roof. The wind carries golden dust.
Somewhere below, Kate walks around the workshop with a sword at her belt. G.A. washes tools in the workshop. Nolan sleeps curled up on a bench. A quiet evening, an ordinary one. Evelyn turns toward him. Her face is close. She takes off her glasses. Without them, her eyes seem bigger, darker. She kisses him, briefly, with dry lips. She pulls away. Dan doesn't move. In his head, Sora, black hair, a mole, laughter. He remembers, as long as he remembers. Evelyn speaks. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Dan is silent. Then he speaks. Don't apologize. She waits. But I have to tell you something. That night he tells her everything. The land, Colorado, the mine in Utah, the collapse, Sora, Mina, the operation in March, the notebook with memories, the crystals that drink his memory. He talks for a long time, confusingly, mixing local words with English when his vocabulary runs short. Evelyn listens, doesn't interrupt, doesn't ask questions. She just listens. When he finishes, she is silent for a long time. Then she speaks.
So every crystal you make is for someone here? Dan nods. He takes a piece from there. She looks at him. And for Mom, too. Yes. What did you lose? Dan thinks. Sora's phone number, her home address, the taste of Grandma's borscht, his neighbor's name, and something else. Something he can't remember anymore because he's forgotten what he's forgotten. Evelyn takes his hand, firmly. Then we need to write everything down, not just the crystals. You too. Everything you remember, right now. Every detail. She stands up. She goes downstairs. A minute later, she returns with a notebook and a pen. She sits down next to him. Tell me. And Dan tells her everything he remembers, hour after hour, until dawn. Evelyn writes down every word in a doctor's handwriting. Precise, small, legible. Sora loves green tea. Mina draws butterflies with 6 wings. The house is on a street lined with chestnut trees. Grandma sang Ukrainian songs.
Dad worked at an auto repair shop. His first kiss with Sora was in the rain, in the supermarket parking lot. She laughed because his socks were wet. Dan speaks, and his voice breaks. Not from sadness, from fear. Because he doesn't know how much of this is true and how much he's already made up to fill in the gaps. Memory lies. He knows. The brain fills in the blanks with fiction and passes it off as a memory. Maybe Sora wasn't laughing at his socks. Maybe it was a different day. Maybe not the parking lot. He doesn't know. And that's the scariest part. Not the loss, but the uncertainty. Evelyn finishes writing the last line. She closes the notebook. She puts her hand on his shoulder. It's here now. Even if you forget, I'll remember for you. Dawn. Golden light falls on the roof. Dan sits next to a woman who has just buried her mother and written down his life, a life that isn't his, in a notebook. He doesn't know what he's feeling. Gratitude, guilt, warmth, fear, all at once. He stands up, Goes downstairs, puts on his mask, picks up a pickaxe. He heads to the mine, to work, because work is the only thing he knows how to do. And because Nolan needs a new crystal, the old one is running out. The boy is coughing again in the mornings, the 8th month. The silver cohort arrives without warning. 12 horsemen in silver armor. The horses are gray, the cloaks are gray. Their faces are hidden behind masks of polished metal. They appear on the road in the morning, and the whole village freezes. The children run into their homes, the women slam the shutters shut, the men stand in the street and don't move, like rabbits before a wolf. Dan steps out of the workshop. Kate is already standing at the door with a sword in her hand. Dan places his hand on her wrist. No. Kate looks at him. There are 12 of them. Dan nods. That's exactly why, no. The cohort commander dismounts. He removes his mask. A young face, about 25 years old, cold gray eyes. He surveys the village. The workshop. Dan. Kate with the sword. And he says in an even voice, Daniel Pack. King Veldros III invites you to the capital. He isn't inviting you. Dan can tell that from the tone. He demands. He orders. He takes. The silver cohort doesn't kill. It takes. People. Knowledge. Time. Dan asks, why does the king need me? The commander replies,
His Majesty is interested in your methods of processing chronite. Dan stands in the doorway of the workshop. Behind him is a workbench with tools, a shelf with crystals, Evelyn's notebook. He thinks fast. 12 fighters, professionals, armed. He's not a fighter. Kate alone against 12 won't stand a chance. Nowhere to run. Can't fight. That leaves the third option. A deal. Dan says, "Wait here." He enters the workshop. Kate follows him. She whispers, "What are you doing?" Dan doesn't answer. He walks to the shelf. He takes a crystal, the best one he has, cut into 64 facets. He spent a week making it. For Garen.
3 years of slowed time. So the old man can see his granddaughter's wedding. Dan stands there holding the crystal. Sora, Mina, Garen, J.A. and her wedding, which the old man wants to see. It all hangs in the balance. He steps out, approaches the commander, hands over the crystal. This is for His Majesty. 64 facets. Each facet is a day. 64 days of pure time dilation for him personally. The commander takes the crystal, holds it up to the light. Even through the metal mask in his hands, Dan can see the crystal working. The light refracts. 64 rays fan out. The air around them thickens, slows down. Dust particles hang in the air. The commander looks at the crystal for 3 seconds, then at Dan. Dan speaks. In return, I ask for one thing. A year of neutrality. 12 months during which the cohort does not come here, does not touch the settlement, does not touch the workshop, does not touch my people. In a year, I'll make another one. For the king. The commander is silent. He doesn't make the decision. He's a courier. But he sees the crystal, and he knows that no chronograph on the continent does anything like this. He hides the crystal in his bag. He mounts his horse. The cohort turns around. 12 horsemen ride off down the road, silently, without a word. Dan stands and watches them go. Kate stands beside him. You just gave up 3 years of Garen's life. Dan nods. I know. He turns and walks into the workshop. He sits down at the workbench. He takes a new uncut crystal. He begins to work. He needs to make a new stone for Garen, from scratch. And this time, better, with 72 facets. So it will last not 3 years, but 4. His hands move. The tool glides over the facets. Light passes through the magnifying glass. Dan works and feels the crystal drinking, a thin thread stretching from his head. He tries to understand what is slipping away, what he is losing right now. He goes over it in his mind. Sora, he remembers. Mina, he remembers. Colorado, he remembers. Father, he remembers. Mother, he remembers. Grandmother, he remembers the voice. No, he doesn't remember the voice. He remembers there was a voice. He remembers she sang, but the melody is gone. Another piece, another empty frame in the album. Dan puts down his instrument. He goes to Evelyn. He takes the notebook, the other one, his own,
He finishes the line. Grandma sang. I don't remember the melody. He closes it, returns to his work. Garin comes in the evening, stands in the doorway, silent. He knows. The whole village knows. The silver cohort came for Dan, and Dan bought his way out, with the crystal that was meant for Garin. The old man stands and is silent. Then he speaks. You shouldn't have. Dan doesn't look up. I had to. Garin steps closer, puts a hand on his shoulder, heavy, rough. You're a fool. Dan almost smiles. I know. Garin stands there for a minute. Then he leaves. He turns around at the threshold. He says, My granddaughter.
Dan waits. She respects you. That's a lot. Dan nods. I know. Garin leaves. Dan sits at the workbench. 72 facets. 4 years. For Garin. He works until dawn. In the morning, G.A. brings him breakfast. She sets the bowl on the workbench. She sits down on a stool next to him. She watches him work in silence. Then she says, Grandpa said you gave his stone to the soldiers. Dan nods. She is silent. Then she says, I would have given it away too. He looks at her. She doesn't look at him. She looks at the crystal in his hands and says quietly, It's ticking louder down there. In the deep tunnel. I heard it yesterday. Much louder than before. Dan sets down his tool. Louder? She nods, as if she's in a hurry, as if something is waking up. Dan is silent. He thinks about the ticking, about the mountain's heartbeat, about the veins that bloom when he approaches, about the gold dust that settles on his shoulders thicker than on others, as if the mountain recognizes him. As if the chronite responds to his touch. Why? He doesn't know. Not yet. But he feels the answer is there, down below, in the deep tunnel, where the ticking comes from. Rumors travel faster than feet. Dan knew that. He was prepared. But he didn't expect her to be the first to arrive. Evelyn Hartley appears in the village at the end of the 3rd month, thin, pale. Her traveling cloak is splattered with mud up to her knees. On her nose, glasses with a cracked left lens. A rare thing in this world. Glass is expensive here. Only scientists and doctors wear glasses. She is a former doctor from the city of Bryn. 2 days on foot along a muddy road. Alone. She knocks on Garin's door at dawn. Dan opens it. The woman stands in the doorway and looks at him with eyes red from lack of sleep. Her lips are pressed into a thin line. She isn't crying. She stopped crying long ago. She speaks in an even voice. My mother is dying. The rot of time. 4 chronographs have failed. Treatment isn't cost-effective. I was told there's a man here who makes crystals differently. Dan stands in the doorway barefoot and in a rumpled shirt. He looks at Evelyn and sees what he's seen dozens of times in the mines. A person who's come for one last hope. You don't tell someone like that to wait. You tell them to come in. She enters. She sits down at the table, hands on her knees, back straight. Even now, even after a 2-day journey, she holds herself together. Not because she's strong, because if she lets go, she'll fall apart, and there'll be nothing left to pick up. Dan sets water and bread in front of her. He sits across from her. Tell me.
Evelyn tells him. Briefly, precisely, like a doctor accustomed to describing symptoms rather than feelings. Mother, 60 years old, an impossible age by local standards. She only lived to 60 because Evelyn's late husband was a chronograph and brought home shards. Her husband died 4 years ago in a cave-in. The shards ran out.
Her mother began to age, then faster than she should have. Then rot set in, the local equivalent of cancer. Cells break down not from mutation, but from the leakage of time. The body ages unevenly. Her left hand is already like that of a 100-year-old. Her right one still works. Her heart skips a beat every other time. The pain is constant, day and night, without a break. Evelyn visited 4 chronologists in 3 cities. They all said the same thing. To freeze time, she needs 20 grams of pure chronite. It costs 20 houses. She doesn't have that kind of money. No one in Bryn Mawr has that kind of money. Dan listens and does the math. 20 grams of uncut chronite in shards. Chaotic recoil. Uncontrollable blast. Of course it takes a lot. They flood the whole house with water just to put out a candle on the table. But if you cut it, if you direct the stream precisely at the affected area, not 20 grams, but 2, maybe 1.5. 1 proper crystal instead of a bag of junk, he says.
I need to see your mother. Evelyn nods without hesitation. The road to Bryn Mawr takes a day and a half. D-Dan walks quickly, a backpack with tools on his back. Evelyn keeps up. They hardly speak, but during a rest stop in the evening, when the campfire crackles between them, she asks, "Why are you doing this?" Dan thinks for a long time. He stares at the embers. Then he answers, "Because I know how." She looks at him over her cracked glasses. "That's not enough." He shrugs. "Not enough, but it's the truth." Bryn Mawr is bigger than the village of Garin, a real town, 2-story stone houses, a market square with a well, a wall around the perimeter. The people look better fed and cleaner, but their eyes are the same. Tired, dull, like people who are counting down their remaining days. Evelyn's mother lies in a small room on the 2nd floor. Her name is Margot. Small, withered. The left side of her body looks 100 years old.
The right, 60. The difference is visible to the naked eye. Her face is twisted. The hair on the left side is white as snow. On the right, it's still dark with gray streaks. She isn't sleeping. The pain won't let her. Dan sits down next to her on a stool. He takes her right hand, the one that still works. Margot looks at him with cloudy eyes. "Who are you?" Dan answers, "A man who's going to try to help." He takes a crystal out of his backpack, clear, uncut. He brought it with him on purpose. He secures it in a clamp, places it on the windowsill next to the bed. He looks at Margot. He thinks. The rot of time is a leak. Time leaks out of the cells faster than it should, like a hole in a bucket. You can keep pouring water in, that's the way of chronographs. Pour and pour until the bucket is full. 20 grams. But you can plug the hole. Not pour, but seal. For that, you need a facet that doesn't give, but holds it. A reverse cut. Not a lens, but a mirror. Not scattering, but focusing. Dan works for 4 hours. Evelyn sits nearby. She doesn't interfere. She doesn't ask questions. She's just there, as if her silence is a tool too. Dan cuts the facets at a different angle.
not outward, but inward, concave. 12 of them, each pointing toward the center of the stone. When he finishes and holds up a candle, the crystal doesn't emit rays. It draws the light in. For a moment, a dark ring forms around the stone, a shadow in reverse. Dan presses the crystal against Margot's left wrist, where the pulse is, where the leak is strongest. 1 second. 2. Nothing. 3. Margot exhales, long, deeply, like a person who has been carrying a burden for 20 years and has finally set it down. The pain recedes. Not all of it. Dan can see it on her face, but enough. The wrinkle between her eyebrows smooths out. Her jaw relaxes. The fingers on her right hand, which had been clenched into a fist, unclench. Margot closes her eyes.
For the first time in 3 weeks, she falls asleep, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Evelyn stands against the wall. She presses her fist to her mouth. Her shoulders tremble. She doesn't allow herself to cry. She's a doctor. Doctors don't cry at a patient's bedside. But her chin trembles. Dan speaks softly. This will last a month, maybe a month and a half. The crystal will slow the leak but won't stop it. I need a second stone. A better one. A more precise one. That takes time and materials. Evelyn lowers her hand. Her voice is steady, almost steady. What do you need? He lists them. Pure chronite, the best you can get. A tool sharper than the one he has. Glass for lenses. Good stuff, no bubbles. And time. He needs time. She nods. You'll get everything. She doesn't ask the price. She asks something else. How can I help right now? Dan looks at her straight back, at her cracked glasses, at the doctor's hands. Neat, precise, accustomed to fine work. You know how to keep records.
She almost smiles. I kept records at Bryn Mawr Hospital for 3 years. Every patient, every medication, every result. Not a single mistake. Dan nods. I need someone who will record everything, every crystal, who it's made for, how many facets, what angle, what effect, how long it lasts, what works, what doesn't. I can't keep it all in my head. He doesn't tell her why. Doesn't tell her that his mind is slowly going blank, that every crystal in his hands pulls a thread from him, that the records are necessary because soon he'll start forgetting his own methods. She doesn't know that. Not yet. But she nods. I'll stay. They return to the village of Garina together. Margot is asleep. The crystal on her wrist glows dimly in the semi-darkness of the room, like a nightlight, like a promise that morning will come. The 4th month. The workshop is just a name for now. A table by the window in Garina's house, tools on the shelf, a magnifying glass on a stand.
Evelyn's notebook, its columns of entries growing. But Dan is already looking ahead. He needs a separate room. Clean, bright, with the right lighting. Cutting requires precision, and precision requires light. He asks Garen. The old man thinks about it for a day. Then he gives him an empty barn on the edge of the village. The roof leaks, the walls are full of cracks, but the location is right. Windows facing east. The morning sun falls on the workbench in an even golden stream. Perfect. Dan and Tobias spend 2 weeks fixing up the barn. They patch the roof with shingles. They caulk the walls with moss and clay. They set up a heavy workbench made of oak planks. Dan draws up a plan. The work area by the window. Storage in the back. Evelyn's desk against the wall with a shelf for notebooks. A separate bench for those who've come for help, so they can sit and wait like human beings instead of standing in the doorway. Orrin carves a sign out of wood. One word. Workshop. Evelyn looks at the sign and says, "Modest." Dan nails it above the door. "Let's start small." People come. First from the settlement, then from nearby villages. The rumor of a deaf girl who heard her father's voice spread through the region like a stone down a slope, wider with each passing day, faster with each passing day. They come with whatever they have, a sack of grain, dried meat, a scrap of cloth, a clay pot. They don't know how much Dan's work costs. He doesn't know either, because he has no price. He doesn't haggle. He doesn't sell. Every stone is a name. When a farmer comes with his sick wife, Dan's first question is, "What's her name?" The farmer is surprised. "Why do you need her name?" Dan replies, "I don't make crystals. I make a crystal for her. Tell me, what hurts? How long has it been? Where exactly?" The farmer tells him, "Her name is Agnes. Joints. 3 years now. Worse in the winter. Her hands won't straighten in the mornings. She can't knead dough. And she's a baker."
Bread is all they sell. Without bread, the family goes hungry. Dan listens. Evelyn takes notes. Then he goes down into the mine. He extracts the crystal. Then he cuts it. For Agnes, he makes a stone with long, narrow facets. A slow, steady release, like a warm compress that never cools. Not an explosion, but steady warmth. For the blind old man from the distant village, he makes a stone with a single large facet. Precise, focused, like a flashlight beam in the dark. It doesn't flood the whole face with light, but strikes right at the nerve. Different every time, tailored to each person. And it works every time. Not perfectly, sometimes not quite as he expected. Agnes got not 6 months of relief, but 4. The old man doesn't see clearly, but as if through a fogged-up window. But he sees. And 4 months without pain in his hands is 4 months of bread for the family. Every crystal drinks from Dan, in small sips. He feels it every time. A thin thread stretches out from his head.
It's not pain, more like pulling a thread from a sweater. It doesn't hurt, but the sweater gets thinner. By the end of the 4th month, he can't remember the address of his house in Colorado. He knows it's the street with the chestnut trees. He remembers the chestnuts. He remembers how Mina used to collect them in her pockets in the fall and bring home 20 at a time. But the house number has faded. And the street name. Just an empty space in his head. He starts a second notebook. Not the one Evelyn keeps, his own, a small one, which he hides under his mattress. In it, he writes down everything he remembers. Sora, black hair down to her shoulders, a mole on her left cheek, works at the library, loves green tea, laughs while covering her mouth with her hand. Mina, 5 years old, draws butterflies, always with 6 wings, sings off-key and loudly, afraid of shots, heart defect, surgery in March. M money in the bottom drawer. Every evening, he rereads the list.
Adds details while he still remembers. Crosses out the ones he's lost. The list grows and shrinks at the same time. More lines. Fewer living memories behind them. Words on paper instead of pictures in his head. One night, Evelyn sees him with the notebook. A candle is burning. He's sitting on a mattress, reading with his lips moving. She stands in the doorway,
Doesn't come in, doesn't ask, but she watches, and Dan feels her gaze. She sees a man clinging to something invisible. She doesn't yet know what exactly. On the 5th month, J.A. appears. She doesn't appear. She's always been here. Garen's granddaughter, 19 years old, the only female miner in the cooperative. Dan had seen her from day one, but hadn't crossed paths with her. She worked alone in the farmost pit. She arrived later than everyone else. She left before everyone else. She wore men's pants and a shirt, a short haircut. By local standards, outrageous. A woman has no business in the mine. But Gia doesn't ask the locals for their opinion. She goes down every day and crawls into the worst places, where the supports are creaking, where the ceiling crumbles into fine dust, where Dan's markings scream, "Danger! Do not enter!" He notices it when he checks the markings. The red rag has been moved. Someone went in. He puts it back. The next day, it's moved again. The 3rd time, he arrives early and waits at the entrance to the Katoda. G.A. appears with a pickaxe on her shoulder. She sees him. She stops. She looks at him silently. Dan says, "This face is dangerous. The ceiling is unstable." She replies curtly, "I know." "Then why are you going in there?" She's silent for a long time. Then she says, "My father died here 4 years ago. He didn't finish the vein." Dan looks at her. 19 years old, short hair, a stubborn chin. Calluses on her palms so thick the skin shines. Her eyes are angry. Not at him, at something inside. He's seen this before, in the mines in Colombia. Young guys who climb into holes not because they're brave, because they feel guilty. They think they have to, that they have no right to safety, that their lives are worth less than a dead man's unfinished work. Dan speaks to her softly. "Your grandfather wants you to live, not to finish the job." She flinches, as if from a slap. He continues, "Stop looking for death. Start looking for veins. You have the best hearing in the crew." She blinks. "How do you know about my hearing?" "Because I've been watching. You're the first to notice when the rock changes. You turn your head toward the wall half a second before the rock creaks. You hear the mountain." She doesn't answer, but the anger in her eyes fades. Confusion remains. No one has ever told her that before. Everyone else said something else. "Get out of the mine. You're a girl. This isn't your business." Or they stayed silent, which is even worse. Dan turns and walks to the workbench. An hour later, he returns with a map. He spreads it out on the rock. "Here are the 3 veins we're working. Here's your father's face. Here's the deep adit where I went alone. Show me where you hear the mountain best." G.A. leans over the map. She traces it with her finger. "Here and here." Dan looks. 2 points. In a straight line. The line goes down, toward the deep adit, toward the place where he heard the ticking. He doesn't tell her that. He keeps it to himself. From that day on, Jia works alongside him, not in the workshop, in the mine. Dan teaches her to read the rock. He shows her the stress lines, explains how to determine the vein's direction by its outcrops, the flow line. Don't break it, just chip it away. Parallel, not perpendicular, like slicing sausage. Jia learns quickly, eagerly, with a kind of fury. 2 weeks later, she brings the first whole crystal. Small, with a crack, but whole, not a fragment. Dan takes it, turns it in the light, looks at her. She stands covered in dust,
mask around her neck.
Hands dirty up to the elbows, and for the first time ever, there is no anger on her face. There is something else, something resembling peace. 6th month. A team. Not a crew, a team. Dan cuts the crystals. Evelyn keeps records and greets people. J.A. extracts chronite in the mine using a new method. Tobias and Rick handle the supports and safety in the tunnels. Nolan hauls ore and learns from J.A. Orrin forges tools. 7 people, counting Dan. Garin is above them all. He doesn't give orders. He is present. He stands by the wall and watches. That is enough. Mortality in the mine is 0 for the 5th month in a row. Not a single casualty. Not a single case of accelerated aging. The masks are working. The ventilation is working. The shift system works. The markings work. The miners breathe. They live. Their faces are rosier than they were 3 months ago. Their skin isn't as dry. Their eyes aren't as dull. Everyone notices. A delegation from 2 neighboring villages comes to see Dan. 4 men. Older, gray-haired, with heavy hands. They ask to be taught. Dan thinks about it for a day. Then he agrees. He draws a diagram of a ventilation shaft. Hot air rises, fresh air is drawn in from below. A vertical pipe from the tunnel to the surface, at least 2 meters in diameter. He draws a diagram of a respirator. 4 layers of fabric, charcoal between the layers, change every 3 days. He draws markings. Red means danger, blue means checked, green means safe to work. The men listen. One writes with charcoal on a scrap of leather. Another cries, quietly, without wiping his cheeks. Dan doesn't ask why. He knows. Someone died. Died foolishly. Died from something that could have been prevented with a rag and charcoal. The men leave. Dan stands at the threshold of the workshop and watches them walk down the road. Tiny figures beneath the gray sky. Evelyn stands beside him. You know what will happen next. Dan knows. Rumors are spreading. A man who takes time in its entirety. A man under whom miners do not die. A man who gives the deaf their hearing and the sick their peace. Such a man cannot go unnoticed. And he is not mistaken. A week later, a man in clean clothes arrives in the village. Fine fabric. With a coat of arms on his sleeve, a golden pickaxe on a black field. The coat of arms of the Chronograph Guild. The man introduces himself as an inspector. Polite, smiling. He surveys the village. He goes into the mine. He stands by the shaft looking up. He looks at the markings, at the miners in their masks. He shakes his head. He jots something down in a small notebook. Then he goes to the workshop. He stands in the doorway and surveys the workbench. Tools, crystals on the shelf. His smile slowly fades. Dan is sitting at the table, working. He doesn't look up. The inspector speaks. You've got an interesting operation here. Dan replies without looking up from the stone. Thank you. The inspector continues. The guild controls chronite mining on the continent. Every operation requires a license. The production tax is 15%. Dan sets down his tool. We're working on a claim the guild declared abandoned 20 years ago. We mine what you discarded. The inspector smiles. We didn't discard it. We classified it as unprofitable. Different things. Dan stands up. He walks over to the shelf. He picks up a crystal, the smallest one, a reject, with an internal crack. Unsuitable for medical work. He places it on the table in front of the inspector. Here's your tax. The inspector takes the stone,
holds it up to his eye, and freezes. Because even Dan's rejected crystal is cut better than the guild's finest stone. The facets are even. The light passes through cleanly. No cloudy spots, no chaotic rays. The inspector places the crystal back on the table, slowly. His hands tremble slightly. He says, "I'll report this to management." He turns and leaves. He doesn't say goodbye.
Dan sits down at the table. Evelyn stands by the wall with her arms crossed over her chest.
"This is the beginning." Dan nods.
"Yes, the beginning."
3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of routine work. 3 weeks when Dan goes down into the mine every morning and sits at the workbench every evening. 3 weeks when Evelyn fills a notebook with names and numbers. Then the silence ends. She comes at night. Dan doesn't hear her. He wakes up to a shadow standing over him. The moon shines through the window. A woman, tall, muscular, dark skin, a scar across her entire face from temple to chin, white against the dark, like lightning frozen in her skin, a knife in her hand, long, narrow, professional. Dan doesn't move. He looks at her, at the knife, at the scar. He speaks calmly. "If you wanted to kill me, you wouldn't have woken me up." The woman is silent for a second. Then she puts the knife away. She sits on the floor against the wall, crosses her legs. She speaks. "My name is Kate Okafor.
The guild paid me to kill you." Dan sits on the bed, his back to the wall. His heart is pounding, but his voice is steady.
"How much did they pay?"
5 grams.
Dan does the math. 5 grams of chronite, 5 houses, for one miner from the backwoods. They're scared. "Why didn't you kill him?" Kate is silent. Then she speaks slowly. "I've been watching you for 3 days. I saw how you work. I saw the girl who hears, the boy who breathes, the old man who cried by the hole in the ceiling." She falls silent. "I returned the deposit. They'll send someone else. You have a month, maybe less." Dan stands up. He puts the kettle on the coals. He sits down on the floor across from her. "What are you going to do now?" She shrugs. "I'll go somewhere." She has no home, no family. She was sold to mercenaries at the age of 10, and her memory was erased with a crystal. She doesn't remember her childhood. She doesn't remember her parents. She doesn't remember her real name.
Kate Okafor. That's the name from her first employer. Dan listens. He thinks about his notebook under the mattress, about memories that are fading, about what it's like when the past is erased, bit by bit. He knows, not like she does, his memory is fading slowly. Hers was ripped out all at once, but the emptiness is the same. He says, "Stay." She raises an eyebrow. "Why?" "We need security. The guild will send someone else. You said so yourself. And one more thing." She waits. "I'll find that crystal. The one they used to erase your memory. If it exists, I'll bring you back to yourself." Kate looks at him. Her face is impassive. Her eyes are dark. Then she says, "You're a strange man, Daniel Park." He pours her some tea. She takes the mug with both hands. She drinks in silence.
The next morning, Kate stands at the door of the workshop, a sword at her belt, arms crossed. Her face is stony. Evelyn stops in the doorway. She looks at Kate, then at Dan.
"Who's that?" "Our security." Evelyn adjusts her glasses. She has a scar across her face, and she looks at me as if gauging the distance to my throat. Dan almost smiles. "So he's a good guard." The 7th month. Margot is dying. Not from decay, the decay is frozen. Dan's crystal is working properly. The dark ring around the stone doesn't fade. The leak has slowed. But Margot is 60 in a world where people live to 35. Her body is worn out. Her organs are worn out. Her bones are brittle. Her muscles have atrophied. The crystal keeps the disease at bay, but cannot keep old age at bay. Dan knew this from the very beginning. Evelyn did too. They didn't say it out loud. There was no need. They both understood. A week before the end, Margot asks for one thing. Call Tom. Tom is the younger son, Evelyn's brother. They haven't spoken in 15 years. A quarrel, an inheritance, a house, a mess their father left behind after his death. A handful of shards, trifles. 15 years of silence, a handful of frozen seconds. Evelyn writes a letter, sends it with a passing merchant. Tom arrives 4 days later. Tall, thin, the same jawline as Evelyn's, the same eyes. He enters the room. He sees his mother on the bed. He stops at the threshold. Margot reaches out her right hand. Tom stands there. He looks. He takes a step, a second, a third. He sits down. He takes her hand in both of his. Margot says something quietly to him. Dan can't hear. He's behind the door. Evelyn is nearby. She can't hear either. But she sees through the crack as Tom lowers his head, as his shoulders begin to shake, as his mother places her hand on the back of his head, stroking him, slowly, like a little child. They sit like that for over an hour. Margot dies 4 days later, quietly, at night, painlessly. Evelyn holds her right hand. Tom holds her left. The crystal on her wrist is the last to fade. The glow dies out. The stone becomes ordinary, gray, dead, empty. In the morning, the body is carried out. They don't bury people in the ground here. They cremate them. The ashes are mixed with gold dust and scattered to the wind. Time returns to time. Evelyn stands by the fire. Her back is straight. Her eyes are dry. Tom is beside her. They don't speak, but they stand close, shoulder to shoulder, for the first time in 15 years. When the wind carries the ashes away, Tom turns to his sister. He says something. Evelyn nods. He hugs her, briefly, awkwardly, like a man who has forgotten how to hug. Then he walks away. Dan stands at a distance and doesn't interfere. This isn't his moment. In the evening, Evelyn climbs onto the roof of the workshop. Dan finds her there an hour later. She is sitting on the edge with her legs dangling. She is looking at the sky. Gray gold. Always gray gold in this world. He sits down next to her. Doesn't say anything. Waits. Evelyn speaks first. You gave her a month. In that month,
she made up with Tom.
15 years of silence and 1 month of talking. And that was enough. She falls silent. The wind carries golden dust. Somewhere below, Kate is walking around the courtyard with a sword at her belt. J.A. is hammering away in the workshop. Nolan is sleeping, curled up on a bench. An ordinary evening. Quiet. Evelyn turns toward him. Her face is close. She takes off her glasses. Without them, her eyes seem bigger, darker, more vulnerable. She kisses him, briefly, with dry lips. She pulls away. Dan doesn't move. Sora, black hair, a mole on her left cheek, laughter, green tea. He remembers. For now, he remembers. Evelyn speaks. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Dan is silent for a long time. Then he speaks. Don't apologize. But I have to tell you something. He tells her everything. The ground, Colorado, a street lined with chestnut trees, a mine in Utah, a cave-in, Sora, Mina, heart defect, surgery in March, money in the bottom drawer of the dresser, a notebook under the mattress. Crystals that drink memory from it, sip by sip. A phone number he no longer remembers, a home address that has faded away, his grandmother's voice that has vanished. He talks for a long time. He gets sidetracked. He mixes local words with English when his vocabulary runs short. He gets confused about the timeline. He repeats himself here and there. Evelyn listens. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't take his hand. She just listens, just as she used to listen to the dying in the hospital, with her whole body. When he finishes, she is silent for a long time. Then she speaks. So every crystal you make for someone here takes a piece of you from there. Dan nods. And for Mom, too. Yes. What did you lose then? Dan thinks. Sora's phone number, the exact one, her home address, the taste of the borscht his grandmother used to make, his neighbor's name, and something else. Something he no longer remembers because he's forgotten that he's forgotten it. That's the scariest part. Not the loss, the uncertainty. He doesn't know the size of the hole because the hole has erased its own edges. Evelyn is silent. Then she gets up, goes downstairs, returns a minute later with a notebook and a pen, sits down next to him. Tell me everything you remember. Right now. I'll write it down. And Dan tells his story, hour after hour, until dawn. Sora loves green tea with jasmine. Mina draws butterflies with 6 wings because 4 seems too few to her. The house stands on a street lined with chestnut trees. The number has been erased. Grandma sang Ukrainian songs. I don't. His father repaired cars. His hands were covered in oil, and he smelled of gasoline and soap. His first kiss with Sora was in the rain, in the parking lot. She laughed because his socks were wet. Or maybe not his socks, maybe his boots. He isn't sure. Dan speaks, and his voice breaks. Not from grief, from fear. He doesn't know how much of this is true. Memory lies. The brain fills in the gaps with fiction and presents it as the real thing. Maybe Sora wasn't laughing at his socks. Maybe it was a different day. Maybe not the parking lot. He doesn't know. Evelyn writes it all down, in a doctor's handwriting, precise, small, neat. Every word, every detail, every maybe. She finishes the last line. She closes the notebook. She says, "Now it's here. Even if you forget, I'll remember for you." Dawn. Golden light falls on the roof. Dan sits next to the woman who buried her mother today, who has just spent the whole night writing someone else's life in a notebook so that someone else's life doesn't disappear. He doesn't know what he feels. Everything at once, nothing separately. He stands up, goes downstairs, puts on a mask, takes a pickaxe, goes into the mine. Because Nolan needs a new crystal. The old one is weakening. The boy is coughing again in the mornings. The 8th month. The silver cohort arrives at dawn. Without warning, without a letter,
Without an envoy.
12 riders on gray horses, silver armor, gray cloaks, faces covered by masks of polished metal. Hooves clatter on the road, and the sound echoes throughout the village. Children disappear into their homes. Shutters slam shut one after another. Women take the laundry off the lines and go inside. Men stand in the street, motionless, frozen, like prey before a predator. Dan steps out of the workshop. Kate is already at the door, sword in hand, her knuckles white from the grip. Dan places his hand on her wrist. "Put it away." Kate looks at him. "There are 12 of them. That's exactly why you need to put it away. 12 professional fighters in armor. Kate is alone. Even her alone against 12 is suicide. You can't fight. There's nowhere to run." That leaves a third option. The commander dismounts. He takes off his mask. A young face, 25, maybe 26, clean cut, cold gray eyes, no scars, no wrinkles.
A man who has never worked with his hands and never breathed golden dust. He surveys the settlement, the workshop, Dan in his work shirt, Kate with her sword. He speaks in an even voice. "Daniel Pock, His Majesty Veldros III has expressed interest in your methods of processing chronite. Your presence in the capital will be rewarded." Not an invitation. Dan can tell by the tone. An order wrapped in silk. The silver cohort doesn't kill. It takes. People, skill, time. Why does the king need me? The commander tilts his head slightly. His Majesty values talent. Your crystals are unparalleled. The crown wishes to provide you with every condition necessary for your work. Dan stands at the threshold. Behind him, a workbench, tools, a shelf of stones. Evelyn's notebook. A notebook containing his memories. He thinks quickly. Going to the capital means losing everything. The workshop, the team, freedom. He will become a court craftsman, a golden cage. Crystals for the king and no one else. Nolan will die without a new stone. Garin won't live to see his granddaughter's wedding. A peasant from a distant village won't get painkillers for his wife. To refuse means war. 12 fighters are here. How many more are halfway there? The settlement won't hold out. A third way. Trade. Dan speaks. Wait. He enters the workshop.
Kate follows him, whispering, "What are you doing?" Dan doesn't answer. He walks to the shelf, takes a crystal, the best of those available, 64 facets. He worked on it for a week. For Garen. 3 years of slowed time, so the old man can see Gia's wedding. Dan stands holding the stone, warm, heavy, pulsing. In this stone lies a week of his life and another piece of memory. He's forgotten the smell of the coffee Sora used to brew in the mornings, forgot while he was making this stone. And now this stone must be given to a foreign king who has already lived 142 years. Dan clenches the stone in his fist, closes his eyes, opens them.
Steps out, approaches the commander, hands over the crystal. For His Majesty, 64 facets. Each facet is a day. 64 days of pure, controlled time. For him, personally. The commander takes the stone, holds it up to the light. Dan sees the rays fan out. 64 thin golden threads. The air around the crystal thickens. The dust slows, hangs. The commander looks at it for 3 seconds, then at Dan. Dan speaks. "In return, I ask for one thing. A year of neutrality. 12 months. The cohort doesn't come here, doesn't touch the settlement, doesn't touch the workshop, doesn't touch my people. In a year, I'll make another one. For the king." The commander is silent. He's a courier, not a politician. The decision isn't his to make. But he sees the stone. And he knows that no chronograph on the continent makes anything like this. Not even close. He hides the crystal in a leather pouch on his belt. He puts on a mask. He mounts his horse. The cohort turns around. 12 horsemen ride off down the road, without a word. Hooves clatter. Then they fade away. Dan stands and watches them until the silver dots dissolve into the morning mist. Kate approaches from behind. "You gave Garen the stone." Dan nods. "I know." He turns. He walks to the workshop. He sits down at the workbench. He takes a new crystal, uncut, raw. He begins to work. From scratch. For Garen. This time, 72 facets. Not 3 years, but 4. So there's plenty to spare. His hands move with familiarity. The chisel glides across the stone. Shavings fall onto the workbench. Light passes through the magnifying glass. Dan works and feels the crystal pulling at him. A thread, thin, from his mind. What's leaving this time? He sifts through it. Sora. He remembers. Mina. He remembers. Colorado. He remembers. Chestnuts. He remembers. Father. He remembers the face. Hands covered in oil. The smell of gasoline. Mother. He remembers the voice. Grandmother. He remembers what she sang. No melody. Lost it last time. What is it now? What is slipping away right now while he cuts the facets? He doesn't know. He'll find out tonight when he dives into his memory and discovers yet another empty frame. He sets down his tool. He picks up a notebook. He finishes writing. Grandma sang. I don't remember the melody.
Sora's coffee in the mornings. I don't remember the smell. He closes it, returns to work. In the evening, Garen stands in the doorway of the workshop. He's silent. He knows. It's a small town. Everyone saw. Everyone heard. The old man stands and watches Dan at the workbench. Then he says, "You shouldn't have." Dan doesn't look up. "Goodbye." Garen approaches. He puts his hand on Dan's shoulder, heavy, rough, warm. He stands there for a long time. Then he says quietly, "You're a fool, Daniel." Dan almost smiles. "I know." Garen takes his hand away. He walks to the door. He turns around on the threshold. He says, "My granddaughter." Dan waits. "She respects you. That's a lot."
Dan nods. Garen leaves. In the morning, J.A. brings breakfast. She sets the bowl on the workbench. She sits down on a stool next to him. She watches him work in silence. Then she says, "Grandpa told me about the stone, about the soldiers." Dan nods. She is silent. Then she says quietly, "I would have given it up too." He looks at her. She isn't looking at him, but at the crystal in his hands. Then she speaks even more quietly. Down below, the ticking is louder. In the deep tunnel. "I went down there yesterday. I listened. Much louder than before. As if it's in a hurry." Dan sets down his tool. He thinks about the ticking, about the rhythm, about that single beat every 2 seconds that he heard 3 months ago. If it's louder, that means the rhythm is speeding up. That means something is changing. That means whatever is sleeping beneath the mountain is waking up. Or waking up faster. Why now? What has changed? Him. He's changed. He's been here for 8 months now. He mines chronite every day. He touches the veins. He cuts the crystals, and every time the veins react to his touch. They glow brighter. They pulse faster. Golden dust settles on his shoulders thicker than on others, as if the mountain knows him, as if the chronite recognizes his hands. Something down there senses him and responds. Dan says to J.A., "Tomorrow we'll go down. Together." She nods. No questions. No fear. She hears the mountain better than anyone. He reads the rock better than anyone. Together they'll find out what's ticking down there. Dan goes back to work. 72 facets. For Garen. He works until dark and tries not to think about the fact that every facet costs him another day on Earth, another piece of Sora, another piece of Mina, another detail he'll jot down in his notebook and then forget he wrote. They descend at dawn. Dan and J.A., masks on their faces, pickaxes on their backs, an oil lamp in Dan's hand, a rope on J.A.'s belt. Evelyn stays up top. She's not a miner. Her job is notebooks and people. Kate stands at the entrance to the tunnel and watches them go. She wanted to go with them. Dan said no. "If we don't come back by sunset, you know what to do." Kate nodded. Round everyone up and head south. Dan doesn't think they won't come back, but he's worked in the mines for 10 years and knows the rule. Always tell someone you're going and when to expect you back. The first 300 meters are familiar. The main tunnel, the supports, the markings,
The ventilation shaft hums behind them. Then a fork. The left passage is blocked. The right one goes down. Dan remembers. He was here 4 months ago. Back then, the ticking was quiet, distant, just one tick every 2 seconds. Now they're still at the fork, and G.A. stops. She puts her palm on the wall, turns her head. Can you hear it? Dan listens. Yes, the ticking. Louder than before, and faster. 1 beat per second. The rhythm has doubled. They go down. The descent is steep.
Rocks slip under their feet. Dan digs his boots in and holds onto the wall.
Gia walks more confidently. She's used to working underground. She was born in it. After 50 meters of descent, the tunnel widens. The ceiling rises. The gold veins here are as thick as arms. They pulsate. Dan sees it clearly in the lamplight. A sigh. A pause. A sigh. Like breathing. G.A. stands and looks at the walls. She turns pale. They're alive. Dan nods. Or were alive once. They keep going. Another 100 meters down. The tunnel narrows again, then widens again. Dan notices he no longer needs to read the rock. It leads the way on its own. Veins of chronite radiate from the walls to the ceiling and back, and they all run in the same direction, downward, like veins leading to the heart. Another 50 meters. The air is thick, warm. Gold dust hangs in a thick cloud. The respirators are working, but Dan feels warmth on his skin. Not heat, warmth, like a child's hand on his cheek. G.A. grabs his elbow. Stop.
Dan stops. Ahead, the tunnel ends. Not a dead end, a drop-off. They're standing on the edge of the chasm. Dan raises his lamp. The light doesn't reach the bottom, but he can see the walls of the chasm, and the walls are covered in chronite. All over. No rock. Pure crystal. Golden. Pulsating. He's never seen so much chronite. No one has. This isn't a deposit. It's a cavity entirely lined with crystal, like the interior of a giant gemstone. And at the bottom of this cavity, far below, something is glowing. Not with reflected light, with its own. Dan lies down on the edge, leans his head over, looks down. A golden glow. Steady. Pulsing. 1 beat per second. A heartbeat. He sees outlines. Large. Rounded. Something enormous lies at the bottom of the chasm. The size of a house. Or larger. And it's ticking. Gia lies beside him. She looks down. She whispers, "What is it?" Dan doesn't know. Or perhaps he knows but is afraid to say it out loud. Garen told him a legend, the god of time. It collapsed thousands of years ago. Its body shattered. It became chronite. But what if not the whole body shattered? What if something remained intact? Something essential? The heart. They lie on the edge and look down. The ticking fills the space. Steady, strong, alive. Dan feels the crystals around him react to his presence. The veins in the walls pulse brighter, faster. When he reaches out to the wall, the crystals flare beneath his fingers, brightly, as if they recognize him.
J.A. sees it, looks at his hand, at the flash, at him. Why do they do that? Only with you. I came here alone. They didn't glow. Dan pulls his hand away. I don't know. He's lying. He suspects. But the suspicion is so big and strange that he isn't ready to voice it. Chronite reacts to him. Only to him. As if it knows him. As if his hands carry something familiar, something ancient. They climb back up. In silence. Each lost in their own thoughts.
On the surface, Dan sits down on a rock at the entrance to the tunnel. He looks at the sky. Gray gold. Sunset. They've spent the whole day underground. Kate approaches. Did you find anything? Dan answers slowly. Yes. Kate waits. There's a heart down there. Kate raises an eyebrow. Whose heart? Dan is silent. Then he says, I don't know whose, but it's beating. That evening he sits in the workshop and draws. A map. Everything he saw down there, the shaft, the cavern, walls of pure chronite, a glow at the bottom, outlines, dimensions, approximate depth. Evelyn looks over his shoulder. It's real. Dan nods. She takes his map, holds it up to the light. She studies it. Then she says, if this is what I think it is, if this is the heart of the god of time, then the chronite everyone is mining. Dan finishes her thought. It's not a mineral. It's his blood. They look at each other. The room is quiet. The oil lamp crackles. Somewhere behind the wall, Nolan coughs in his sleep. Evelyn says, We can't tell anyone about this. Dan knows. If the Crown finds out that the whole heart of the god of time lies beneath the mountain, they'll send an army here. If the cultists find out, they'll blow up the whole mountain. If the guild finds out, they'll sell the information to the highest bidder. It's a secret. Their secret. He hides the map in a notebook of memories, between Sora and Mina, between the smell of coffee he no longer remembers and the little song about a butterfly he still remembers. At night, Dan lies on the mattress and listens. If it's very quiet, if he doesn't breathe, you can hear the ticking even here. Up above, through hundreds of meters of rock. Quiet, distant, but steady. Like a metronome. Like a heart that waits. The 9th month. The workshop is growing. Dan now has 8 apprentices from neighboring villages. He teaches them gentle excavation, the contour trench, parallel, not perpendicular, like slicing sausage. Garen hears this explanation for the 4th time and still shakes his head. 40 years in the mine. No one ever talked about sausage. The phrase has become something of a password. Newcomers arrive and ask. This is where they teach about sausage. Dan doesn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitches. He made Nolan a new crystal. Better than the first one. 24 facets, precisely tuned for lung tissue. The boy stopped coughing. He breathes cleanly, deeply. He runs around the village from morning till night. He's 14, and for the first time in his life, he's running without gasping for air. Garen got his stone. 72 facets, 4 years of slowed time. The old man took the crystal in both hands. He was silent. Then he said one word. Enough. Not a question, a statement. It's enough for him. He'll see his granddaughter's wedding.
A week after that, he goes out to the backyard in the morning and stands there for a long time.
Dan sees him through the window of the workshop. Garen stands by the garden bed and looks at the barley. Green shoots are pushing through the soil. For Garen, an extra year means this: to see the barley grow, waiting for the harvest, threshing the grain, baking bread, simple things, the only ones that matter. Dan stands by the window and watches the old man by the garden bed, and he feels something tighten in his chest, because he's remembering, as he remembers, how Mina saw snow for the first time. She was 3. She stood on the porch in her bunny pajamas, mouth open, eyes wide, reaching out her hands toward the snowflakes. Sora stood behind her, holding her by the hood so she wouldn't fall off the porch. Dan turns away from the window. His eyes are burning. He isn't crying. He doesn't have the right to. Because Mina is waiting, somewhere unimaginably far away, in another world. She needs surgery, and he promised. One morning, a woman in a hooded cloak enters the workshop. Short, Young, 24, maybe 25. Her face is hidden in shadow. Kate tenses by the door, her hand on the hilt of her sword. The woman pulls back her hood. Blonde hair, pale skin. Her eyes are blue and very tired. She is beautiful. The kind of beauty people have after a long illness, sharp, fragile, like the first ice on a puddle. She speaks. I need help. Dan is used to those words. He hears them every week. Sit down. Tell me, what's your name? The woman hesitates. Then she says, Miriam. Dan waits. She continues, I'm 24. I've been 24 for 6 years now. Dan looks at her more closely. 6 years. She nods. When I was 18, I was poisoned by my stepbrother. My father saved me. He injected me with more chronite than necessary, much more. I survived. But I'm stuck. I'm 24. I don't age. My hair doesn't grow. My nails don't grow. A cut heals in a minute. I can't get sick. I can't get truly tired. I can't. She falls silent. Dan understands. Immortality. Not a gift. A cage. Everyone around her is aging. Everyone around her is dying, and she remains. 24. Forever. Until the chronite in her body runs out, and she doesn't know when that will happen. In a year? In 100 years? In 1,000? He asks, What do you need? She looks him in the eyes. I want to live a normal day, to age for a day, like everyone else, to wake up in the morning and see something new in the mirror, a wrinkle, a gray hair, anything. Dan thinks. A reverse crystal. The one he made for Margot held back time, slowed the leak. But what if we did the opposite? Not slow it down, but speed it up. Not a seal, but a valve. Let the excess chronite escape in a controlled way, in small doses, a day's worth of normal aging. He says, I'll try. Miriam nods. Then she says, There's something else. Dan waits. My father. The one who saved me. His name is Velros, the third,
king of the Northern Empire. Silence. Evelyn drops her pen. Kate takes a step forward. Dan doesn't move.
He looks at Miriam. She looks back. No challenge, no threat, just the weariness of a person who hasn't aged in 6 years and has come to the only one who can help, even if that one person has just bought his way out of her father's army. Dan says, "I don't care who your father is. I don't make crystals for a family name, for a person. What's your name?"
Miriam.
Then sit down, Miriam. He works on her stone for 3 days. It's the most complex cut of all he's ever done. Not 12 facets, not 48, not 72. 6. Just 6 facets. But each is cut at a precise angle that allows the chronite to seep out in microscopic doses. Not an explosion, not a stream, a drop. 1 drop per hour. 24 drops a day. Just enough to make the body age by 1 day. When he finishes and hands her the stone, Miriam presses it against her wrist. Nothing happens. A second. 2. Then she shudders, looks at her hand, holds it up to the light. A thin line appears on the back of her palm. A wrinkle. The first in 6 years. Miriam looks at this line for a long time. Then she raises her other hand and touches her hair. Dan sees it. A single hair on her temple. Light. Slightly lighter than the rest. Not gray, but on its way to gray. Miriam touches it with her fingers. Her face changes. She isn't smiling. She isn't crying. She exhales. Like Margot when the crystal took away the pain. Like Sadie when she heard the name. People exhale the same way when they receive what they've waited for so long, they've forgotten what it's like to wait. Miriam whispers, "Thank you." She stays in the workshop, takes off her cloak, puts on a simple shirt. No one in the village knows who she is. No one will find out. Dan won't say. Evelyn won't say. Kate won't say. Miriam becomes just another person on the team. Quiet, unnoticeable. She helps Evelyn with the records. She knows 6 languages and reads faster than anyone else. In the evenings, she sits by the window and looks at her hands. She searches for new lines, new wrinkles. She counts them, like others count money. Like Garen counts the days until his granddaughter's wedding. Every wrinkle is a day. Every day is a gift. Dan makes a new crystal for her every month. Small, precise, for a day of normal life. And every month, he loses another little piece. His father's face. It was round or oval. Did he have a mustache? He isn't sure. He writes it down in his notebook. Father, face blurry, maybe a mustache, hands definitely greasy, definitely the smell of gasoline. The rest is fuzzy. The notebook gets thicker. Memories fade. The 10th month, she comes out of nowhere, small, dirty, so thin that her ribs are visible through her torn shirt. She's 12, maybe 11, hard to say. Children in this world look younger than their years. There isn't enough food. There isn't enough time. There isn't enough of anything. Kate finds her in the morning by the wall of the workshop. The girl is sitting on the ground with her back pressed against a stone. Her eyes are open. She isn't sleeping. She isn't moving. She's just sitting there, like a broken doll that was set down and forgotten. Kate brings her inside. She sets her down in front of Dan. "I found her by the wall." She says nothing.
Dan crouches down. He looks into the girl's eyes. Empty, dark, deep, like wells with no water. He speaks softly. "What's your name?" She's silent. "Where are you from?" She's silent. Dan doesn't press her. He knows that look. He's seen it in the mines, in people after a cave-in, after an explosion, after they've seen what no one should ever see. Shock. He sets a bowl of porridge in front of her, a spoon, a mug of water. He steps back, sits down at the workbench, works, doesn't look at her, gives her space. An hour later, the girl picks up the spoon. She eats, slowly, mechanically, as if her body remembers how to eat, but her mind doesn't yet.
2 hours later, Evelyn lays her down on the bench, covers her with a blanket. The girl falls asleep, sleeps for 12 hours. When she wakes up, she says one word: Lila. Her name is Lila. The rest comes in bits and pieces, not right away. Not that day, nor the next. A week later, Dan knows the story. Lila is from a cult village, the Sand People, a sect that believes time must be returned to the god of time. Her parents weren't fanatics, ordinary people, peasants who ended up in the village because they had nowhere else to go. Her mother sewed clothes. Her father plowed the land. They lived quietly. They didn't pray. They didn't go to meetings. They just lived. Then Lila fell ill. A fever, a high one. 3 days without sleep. Her mother decided to do what is considered a mortal sin in the village of the Sand People. She traded a piece of chronite with a passing merchant for a winter supply of grain. A tiny shard, dirty, roughly cut, but it was enough to bring down the fever. Lila survived, and 2 days later, the elders came to the house. Someone had ratted them out. The elders didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They were calm. That's the worst kind. Calm people who do terrible things. Lila saw everything from under the bed, a rag doll in her hands. She saw her parents being led out into the street. She saw what they did to them. Dan doesn't ask for details. He doesn't need details. He sees the result. A girl who was silent for a week, who eats mechanically, who sleeps curled up in a ball and wakes at every sound. He does one thing, a simple thing. In the evening, when Lila sits on the bench and stares at the wall, he sits down beside her, silently. Then he takes a comb out of his pocket, a wooden one. Oren made it. And he begins to comb her hair. Carefully, slowly. Her hair is tangled, dirty, knots. He untangles them with his fingers, combs it, divides it into 3 strands, and braids a pigtail, just like he used to do for Mina, every morning. Mina would sit on a chair in the kitchen, swinging her legs. She sang about a butterfly, and he stood behind her and braided it. Left strand, right, left. His hands remember, even when his mind starts to forget. His hands remember. Lila freezes, doesn't move, doesn't breathe. Then her shoulders start to shake, not from crying, from the fact that someone is touching her gently. For the first time in a very long time. Dan finishes braiding the pigtail, ties the end with a scrap of string. Lila turns around, looks at him. Her eyes are wet, but the wells aren't empty anymore. There's water in them. She doesn't say a word.
She lies down on the bench, turns her face toward the wall, falls asleep. She doesn't wake up once that night. Kate stands by the door and watches. Then she turns away quickly, rubs her face with her palm. A month later, Lila speaks. Not much, but enough. She walks with Dan in the mornings, helps Evelyn sort through records, plays with Nolan's dog, and one more thing.
She falls asleep on the floor with her ear pressed against a stone. Every night. Dan notices this on the third day. He asks,
"What do you hear?" Lila says, "A tapping." Dan goes cold. "You can hear it from here?" She nods, loudly. Dan crouches down on the floor next to her, presses his ear against the rock. Silence. He can't hear it. Not here, not on the surface, only in the deep tunnel. But Lila hears it through hundreds of meters of rock. He asks cautiously, "What is it saying?" Lila is silent. Then she answers, "It's waiting." Dan lies on his back. He looks at the ceiling. The heart of the god of time beats beneath the mountain. Lila hears it from the surface. Veins of chronite flare as it approaches. Something connects him to this place. Something older than himself. He doesn't know what, but he knows the answer leads down to the heart, and that sooner or later he'll have to go down there. Not to the edge of the chasm, but to the very bottom. The 11th month.
War begins not with a roar, but with silence. The merchants stop coming. The road north is empty. The road south is empty. Dan is the first to notice because he's waiting for a shipment of glass for lenses from Bryn Mawr. The shipment doesn't arrive. For 2 weeks. Kate goes out on a reconnaissance mission. She returns 3 days later. Her face is grim. The scar on her cheek is wider than usual. Cultists. The Sandfolk have seized the 3 southern provinces. They've blown up 4 mines, cut off the trade routes. Their leader has declared a holy war. All time must return to God. Every crystal is a sin. Every miner is a sinner. The Crown has responded. Velderos has sent an army south. The Silver Cohort leads the vanguard. They are slaughtering cultist villages one after another, without distinction. The guilty and the innocent. Children and the elderly. War. Real. The village of Garin is trapped between them. To the north, the king's army. To the south, the cultists.
To the west, the mountains. To the east, the swamps. Nowhere to go. Dan is gathering a team. Everyone. Evelyn, J.A., Kate, Nolan, Oren, Garin, Miriam, Lila. They're standing in the workshop. 9 people. Dan speaks. Both sides will come here. It's only a matter of time. The Crown knows about the workshop. They want my crystals. The cultists know about the workshop. They want my crystals gone.
We can't fight either of them, Kate says. Then what? Dan replies.
A third side. The workshop becomes a sanctuary. For anyone who doesn't want to fight. For the wounded. For refugees. For children. We don't fight. We heal. We hide. We keep the doors open.
Tobias says, "They'll burn us for this."
Dan nods. They might.
Tobias is silent. Then he says, "All right, I'm staying." For the next 3 weeks, they prepare. Dan goes down into the mine every day. He mines chronite. A lot. More than ever before. He limits himself to 4 crystals a day, different kinds, painkillers, freezing agents, healing agents.
He's stockpiling them for the wounded who will come. And they do come. The first refugees show up a week later. A family from a southern village. A man, a woman, 3 children. The youngest is 2 years old. Cultists burned down their house because the father worked in the mine, because they found a shard of chronite in his pocket. 1 shard. You can buy a loaf of bread with it. They burned down the house for it. Dan takes them in, settles them in the shed next to the workshop, feeds them, then more arrive. And more. By the end of the month, there are 30 refugees in the settlement. Women with children, old people, the wounded, a man with a burned hand, a boy with a fractured skull, a woman holding a dead child in her arms. She won't let him go. She's carried him for 2 days, presses him to her chest. Evelyn gently takes the bundle from her. The woman sits down on the ground and howls, quietly, for a long time, like a dog. Dan works without stopping, crystal after crystal. For the burn, for the wound, for the fever. Every stone drinks from it, thread by thread. He stops counting the losses. He has no time for that. There is only work. 5 weeks after the war began, a detachment approaches the settlement. Not the army, not the cultists. Worse. 10 men in black. No coats of arms, no banners. The Chronograph Guild. Mercenaries. The ones who were supposed to come after Kate. The others. The ones sent to kill Dan. Kate sees them first. She steps out onto the road, alone, sword in hand, 10 against 1. Dan follows her out, unarmed, with a map. He unfolds it in front of the mercenary commander. He points. See this? The mine? The third horizon? The main chronite vein runs beneath it. If you start a fight here now, any fight, the tremors will bring down the third horizon. The vein will be submerged by groundwater. All the city's chronite will become inaccessible. Not for a year, forever. I know this because I'm the only one who's read this rock. The only one who drew the map. You'll kill me and lose the mine. Your masters definitely need this. The mercenary commander looks at the map, at Dan, at Kate with her sword, at the settlement behind them, at the refugees in the windows, at the children. He is silent. Then he turns his squad around. He leaves. Kate lowers her sword. Her hands are shaking. Dan stands with the map in his hands. His heart is pounding so hard he can hear his own blood in his ears. He wasn't lying. The third horizon really is unstable. But the mercenaries didn't know that, and they couldn't verify it. A bluff works when it's backed by knowledge. That evening, Kate sits by the wall of the workshop and sharpens her sword. Dan sits down beside her. She speaks without looking at him. I like you, Daniel. I'm saying this once. What are you going to do about it? Dan is silent. For a long time. Then he says, I don't know, Kate. I have a wife. There. Somewhere else. I don't know if she's alive, if she's waiting, if she even exists for me anymore. But she's in my head. For now, at least. Kate nods. I thought so. She continues sharpening the sword. Dan sits beside her. They are silent. It's neither a refusal nor an agreement. It's the truth, the only thing he can offer. An hour later, Kate says, "Find me that crystal, the one they used to erase my memory. If you can restore a deaf girl's hearing, if you can give an immortal princess wrinkles, give me back my childhood." Dan replies, "I'll find it." She nods. She stands up. She leaves. The sword glints in the moonlight. 1 year and 2 months. The war subsides. It doesn't end, it subsides, like a fire running out of wood. Both sides are bled dry. The cultists have lost their southern strongholds. The crown has lost 3 regiments. No truce has been signed, but the fighting has stopped. Roads open up. Merchants return. Life resumes with the caution of people who don't believe the storm has...
Dan stands in the workshop and looks at the map of the mine. A collapse is marked in red on it. A deep tunnel. The heart.
Lila stands beside him and holds his hand. She's been doing this ever since the day he first braided her hair. She takes his hand and holds it, silently. She speaks. It calls. Dan knows. The ticking has grown so loud that now even he can hear it from the surface. If you press your palm against the workshop wall, you can feel the vibration. Faint, steady, 1 beat per second. The heart is beating, waiting. He makes his decision at night, quietly, no drama. He lies down on the mattress, takes out a notebook, rereads. Sora, black hair down to her shoulders, a mole. I remember. Mina, butterflies, 6 wings, a little song. I remember. A heart defect. I remember. Surgery. I remember. A house on a street with chestnut trees. I remember. No address. My father's face, blurred. My mother's voice, not sure. My grandmother, I remember she was there. Borscht.
I don't remember the taste. A song. I don't remember the melody. My first kiss with Sora. Rain. Parking lot. Wet socks. Or boots. Not sure. The sound of Sora's laughter. I remember. As long as I remember. He closes the notebook, presses it to his chest. The notebook is thick. Half the pages are already blank. Words without pictures, names without faces, dates without feelings. But Sora is there. Mina is there. They hold on. They're the last ones. They're the strongest. In the morning, he announces it. I descend to my heart, not to the edge of the abyss, to the bottom. I need a rope, a lot of rope, and those who want to go with me. Everyone wants to. He chooses. Evelyn goes because she is his conscience and his memory. Gia goes because she hears the mountain better than anyone except Lila. Miriam goes because she is the daughter of the man who bought up the most chronite, and she needs to see where it comes from. Kate is going because she won't let him go alone. Soyeon is going because she's been waiting for this moment for 6 months. A nun of the Order of the Hourglass, not a cultist, keeper of knowledge. She came to the workshop 3 months ago. Quiet, calm. She brews tea in the mornings. She was the first person Dan went to after he found the heart. She listened and nodded.
You are the one we've been waiting for. A stranger, a clockmaker, a visitor from another world, the one who will fix broken time. Dan said back then, I'm not a clockmaker. I'm a mining engineer from Colorado. Jan smiled. It's all the same, Danielish. And Lila. Lila is going because the heart calls her by name. She hears it at night, hears it in the morning, hears it always. The 7 descend into the tunnel at dawn, Evelyn with a map and a notebook, Gia with a pickaxe. Miriam has a torch, Kate has a sword, So Jan has a prayer. Lila is holding Dan's hand. The descent to the chasm takes 2 hours. They stand at the edge.
The golden glow from below is brighter than last time, much brighter. The walls of the chasm pulsate, tick, brighter, tick, dimmer, breathing. Dan secures the rope to a rock ledge. He checks the knots 3 times. He goes down first. Kate follows him, then Gia. The rest wait at the top. The descent is vertical, 30 meters, walls of pure chronite. They glow beneath Dan's hands. They flash, they bloom, as if the mountain is greeting him. He touches the wall and the crystals sing. He can't hear it. He feels the vibration in his palms. Low, deep, warm. His feet touch the bottom. He lets go of the rope, turns around, and sees it. The heart. A giant crystal of golden chronite, the size of a house, irregularly shaped, rounded, with a smooth surface. And it's beating. He sees the surface quiver. Once a second. Tick. The surface expands. Tick. It contracts, like a living heart. The light from it is even, golden, warm. It fills the entire chamber. No shadows, no darkness, only gold.
Kate stands nearby, a sword in her hand. Her face is pale.
What is this thing? Dan doesn't answer. He walks toward the heart. Slowly. A step. Another step. The crystals on the walls flash with every step he takes. Brighter. Brighter. As if he carries the key within him. As if his presence is the password. He reaches out his hand. His fingers touch the surface. Warm. Smooth. Pulsating. And everything explodes in his head. Not a memory, not a vision. A voice. Deep, ancient, infinitely weary, and infinitely alive. Hello, grandson. Dan pulls his hand back. The heart keeps beating. The light doesn't change, but the voice remains. Not in his ears, inside, in his bones, in his blood, in every cell. You're not here by accident. Dan stands and breathes. His hands are shaking. He turns around. Kate and J.A. are standing 10 paces away. Their faces are pale. They heard it too. Everyone heard it. Upstairs by the chasm, Evelyn drops her notebook. Miriam grabs the wall. So Yun drops to her knees.
Lila stands at the edge, calm. The only one who's calm. She's smiling. For the first time in all the time Dan has known her.
smiling like a child who's finally found what she was looking for. The voice continues. I've been waiting 1,000 years. I knew you'd come. You carry the blood of the one who broke me, and only his blood can fix me. Dan stands before a giant, beating heart deep inside the mountain and hears the voice of God speaking to him as if he were family. He is a mining engineer from Colorado. He has a wife and a daughter with a heart defect. He died under a landslide in Utah. He makes crystals for sick children and the elderly, and God calls him his grandson. Because 1,000 years ago, a visitor from Earth killed the god of the hour, and Dan is his descendant. Kronos responds to him because he recognizes the hand of the murderer. Veins flare because blood recognizes blood. A sound comes from behind him. Footsteps. Dan turns around.
A man emerges from the darkness of a side passage he hadn't noticed. Young, 26 years old, a handsome face, sincere eyes. In his hand, a ritual blade with a black chronite edge. Dan doesn't recognize him right away, because the last time he saw that face was in another world, under a different name, in a mine in Utah. Trainee Jake, whom he pushed out from under the rubble, whose life he saved, to whom he gave his own. But here he is called by another name, Jed Al-Horn, High Priest of the Sand Cult, the one who started the war, the one who believes that time must return to God, that the timekeeper must die, having given all time to sorrow, not out of malice, out of faith. Jed stands before him, a blade in his hand. His eyes gleam in the golden light. He speaks softly. Thank you for saving me back then. Dan looks at him. The boy he pushed out from under tons of rock. The boy because of whom he is here. Because of whom he lost Sora and Mina. Because of whom he died.
Jed continues. I'm sorry I have to kill you now. Dan stands before the heart of God. Behind him, Kate with a sword, Gia with a pickaxe. Up above, Evelyn with the notebook of his memories, Miriam with a torch, So-Yeon with a prayer, Lila on the edge of the chasm. His entire team. His entire new family. Jed takes a step forward. The blade rises, and the heart behind Dan's back beats. Tick, tick, tick. Dan speaks. You're right. It's not my time. Jed stops. Dan continues. But it's not yours either. He points behind him. At the heart. It's his. And it seems he hasn't finished living yet. Let's ask him. Jed looks at him, at the heart, at the blade in his hand. Dan turns toward the crystal. He does the only thing he knows how to do. He doesn't fight. He doesn't run. He doesn't pray. He puts his ear to his heart. He closes his eyes. He listens. Just as he listened to the rock in Utah. Just as he listened to the stone in Colombia.
Just as he listened to the walls of the tunnel on the first day. He is a mining engineer. He listens to what the mountain says. The heart speaks, not with words, with a ticking, a rhythm, a vibration that passes through his body and becomes something greater, something everyone can hear. The voice fills the cavern, deep,
warm, alive. I am not dead. I was asleep, and I dreamed of a world where people have enough time, where children are not born with ticking clocks, where old people watch the barley grow. I wake up because my grandson has come and placed his hand on my heart. He didn't come to kill. He came to fix, just as he fixed everything around him, the mine, the people, time. Jed stands with his blade. Tears stream down his face. He hears the voice of the God to whom he has dedicated his life, the God he wanted to save by destroying all sinners, and this God speaks to him. Put down the knife. I don't need a sacrifice. I need a repairman. The blade falls onto the stones. A clang, silence. Then a ticking. Steady. Calm. One beat every 2 seconds. The rhythm slows. His heart calms. Dan stands with his ear pressed against the warm golden crystal. He hears the rhythm, and the rhythm tells him something else. Quietly, just for him. Your daughter, Mina. Surgery in March. You'll make it. I'll help you get back. When you finish what you started. Dan opens his eyes. He pulls his ear away from the heart. He turns to his team. Evelyn looks down at him from the edge of the chasm, a notebook pressed to her chest, the notebook containing his life, his Sora, his Mina, everything he's forgotten and everything still remembers. Gia stands with a pickaxe, ready to dig to the center of the earth if he says so, Kate with a sword, ready to fight an army, Miriam with a torch, So-Yeon on her knees. Lila is smiling. Dan says, we need to work hard, because we're not just mining crystals, we're fixing time. He looks at them all, his team, his family. Then he looks at Jada,
The boy he saved in another life, who came to kill him, who is crying. Dan tells him, Get up! I'll teach you how to slice sausage.
Somewhere far away, infinitely far away, in another world, Mina draws a butterfly with 6 wings. Sora brews green tea with jasmine. The money lies in the bottom drawer of the dresser. The operation in March. Dan remembers. He stands at the bottom of the world, next to the heart of God, surrounded by people who have become his second home. And he remembers, because he is also work, the most important kind. The heart beats, steadily, calmly, tick, 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 like a clock that's running right again.